There's a kind of silence in northern Michigan's Upper Peninsula that doesn't feel like peace. It feels like something waiting. I learned that the hard way. I was 34, recovering from a burnout that nearly hollowed me out. You spend years grinding for a paycheck, chasing the illusion of balance, and then one day you blink and everything feels fake. The office lights, the conversations, even the food. I bought the Volkswagen Westphalia not to run away, but to remember something about myself I thought I'd forgotten. That late September, I headed north, following winding two-lane roads flanked by hardwoods just beginning to turn, flashes of gold and crimson trembling in the wind. The kind of trip that makes you think you're about to find God, or yourself, or at least something simple and good. Tahquamenon Falls State Park was my first stop. The locals call it the Root Beer Falls because the water runs dark with tannins. I pulled in late afternoon, found a primitive spot a bit farther from the others, perfect for solitude, or so I thought. I parked the van, slid open the side door, and breathed in that crisp scent of pine, damp soil, and river moss. I didn't notice it then, but the wind didn't move right. It came in short, uneven pulses, like something breathing. I unpacked anyway, brewed a quick coffee on the camp stove, and sat in my canvas chair watching the sun dip behind the trees. It was quiet. Too quiet, no rustle of animals, no chirping birds, just that awful, unsteady wind. That night, I slept with the van windows cracked, letting in the cool air. But something woke me around 2 a.m. It was the kind of sound that doesn't belong. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not on the van, on a tree, close. Knock, knock, knock. I held my breath, waited, nothing. Then, maybe 10 minutes later, closer now, 3 more knocks, hollow and heavy, like wood on wood. I was camped near no one. I'd passed a few RVs earlier in the day, maybe a half-mile back. The nearest ranger station was even farther. I tried to rationalize. A deer rubbing antlers, a falling branch, maybe even an echo of something natural. But I knew better. You don't grow up hiking and not learn the language of the forest. This wasn't random. This was rhythmic, intentional. I lay awake until the sky started to gray, heart thudding like it was trying to punch its way out of my chest. When I finally stepped out, everything looked normal, too normal, as if the woods were pretending. That next day, I drove deeper past Sinai National Wildlife Refuge, hoping to shake the feeling. I found another campsite, this one near a narrow trail that wound through marshland and opened into a secluded lake. Beautiful, isolated, no cell service. Perfect, I told myself. Just what I need. I stayed there 2 nights. Each night the same thing. Knock, knock, knock. Sometimes far, sometimes close. Sometimes behind the van, other times ahead of the trail, like it was waiting. I never saw anything, but once I heard what sounded like whispering. Not language, just syllables being formed and broken again. A shuffling of voice without meaning. And it was coming from both sides of the van. I kept the doors locked, didn't move. Told myself it was just the wind doing something strange through the reeds, but I couldn't deny the smell. The second night, just before sunset, a rank odor drifted through the camp, like wet fur and rotting meat. Animal, but wrong. I'd been around bear carcasses before, and this wasn't that. This was chemical, bitter, like something old but preserved, and it clung to the back of my throat long after it faded. The third morning, I didn't even wait for coffee. I packed up and drove west, toward Pictured Rocks, thinking I'd find some tourists, maybe a ranger, someone, anyone, to confirm I wasn't losing my mind. I ended up in a tiny town called Christmas. Real place. Population couldn't have been more than 500. Had one of those souvenir shops with carved black bears and Bigfoot bumper stickers out front. I stopped at the gas station, asked the clerk if he knew anything about strange noises in the woods out by Sene. He didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "You hear it too?" he asked, without looking up from the register. I nodded, slow. "Don't follow it," he said, sliding me my change. "It don't want talking, it wants company." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he just went quiet and turned away. That's when I decided, no more state parks. I'd head into the national forest, maybe find a dispersed site, lay low. Seclusion didn't feel safe anymore, but being around others felt worse. Like whatever this thing was, it wanted to be seen. It just hadn't decided how. So I picked a place near the Hiawatha National Forest. There was a logging road, rutted and muddy, that led to a patch of high ground above a lake. It wasn't marked, but I found it on a VW forum. Someone had said it was perfect for off-grid soul searching. I parked under a grove of white pines, cracked open a beer, and tried to pretend it was just a dream. That none of it was real. That was the last time I felt anything close to normal. Because what came next wasn't just knocking, it was watching. The pines swayed gently, casting long shadows over the roof of my Volkswagen as I sat inside that night, watching them rock like slow metronomes in the dark. I should have left the moment I felt it, that gut-level knowing that something had found me. It started with a light, not bright, not a flashlight or a headlamp, just a soft, flickering orange, like a campfire deep in the woods. I hadn't seen another soul on the drive-in. The road was nearly impassable. My van had bottomed out twice just getting up the slope. No one should have been back there, and yet the glow moved. Not with the erratic dance of flame, but steady, purposeful, almost pulsing. I turned off every light in the van, sat there with my breath locked in my chest, waiting for it to disappear, but it didn't. It got closer. I cracked the side window just enough to listen. Silence. Not a cricket, not a single branch breaking, just that faint, awful glow getting stronger in the trees. It wasn't flickering anymore. It was breathing. I know how that sounds, but when you've lived out of your van long enough, when the stillness of the forest becomes your bedroom ceiling, you begin to understand the difference between light and presence. This was both. Then it stopped. Right outside the tree line, maybe 20, 30 yards from the van, too far to see clearly, close enough to feel. I could see the edge of it through the windshield now, just hovering there between two birches. Orange, pulsing, no smoke, no crackling. And then something stepped in front of it. A silhouette. Tall, slender, but wrong, like a trick of the eyes, stretched and too fluid. It didn't move like anything I'd ever seen in the wild or anywhere else. It just stood there, watching. I didn't even blink. Just sat frozen, staring through the windshield, hands gripping the steering wheel like I could drive away without turning the key. Then it tilted its head, and the light behind it went out. Total blackness. I couldn't see my own hands. My breath caught in my throat and my chest started to tighten. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Minutes. Hours, maybe. Afraid to move. Afraid to make a sound. And then the knocking returned. Not on a tree this time. On the van. 3 knocks. Soft. Deliberate. Right on the rear panel. Then again on the sliding door. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't even dare reach for my phone. It had no signal anyway. And even if it had, what would I say? That something tall and silent was knocking on my 1987 Westphalia deep in the northern forest, miles from anyone or anything? No one would come. No one could. Then came the whispering. Just outside the metal. Soft. Syllabic. Like breath leaking through a pipe. I couldn't understand it. Couldn't make out a single word. But it made me feel like I was being invited. I reached for the knife I kept next to the stove, gripping it so hard my knuckles ached. But I knew if that door slid open, I wouldn't get the chance to use it. And then, as suddenly as it started, everything went quiet again. I sat there, wide-eyed, waiting for the first signs of dawn. The darkness didn't lighten. The birds didn't sing. Time slowed into something twisted. I must have passed out at some point, because I woke up to pale morning filtering through the pines. Nothing was disturbed. No footprints, no burn marks. Just me, the van, and the forest pretending like nothing had happened. But I knew better. I packed without even brushing my teeth, threw everything into the cabinets, slammed the doors, and peeled out down the muddy trail like I was escaping a war zone. I didn't stop until I hit Mackinac City. It was loud, crowded, bright, the kind of tourist chaos I normally avoided like the plague. But I was grateful for every screeching kid, every souvenir shop playing polka music. Civilization never felt so sacred. I parked the van in a public lot near the ferry docks and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel for what must have been an hour. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. The fear had burrowed into me, bone deep. Not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't. That night, I rented a motel room. First one in weeks. Slept with the lights on and a chair jammed under the doorknob. But here's the thing. The knocking didn't stop. Not on the door, not on the window. In my head. 3 knocks. Over and over. Like a rhythm I couldn't shake. Like something inside me had been marked. The next morning, I checked the van. Clean. Untouched. No scratches. No dents. I even climbed underneath to look for strange marks. Nothing. I should have left the peninsula. Driven south until I hit Indiana, or farther. But something pulled me back. Not curiosity, not stupidity. It was like I needed to finish something. Like that thing, whatever it was, didn't want to hurt me. Not yet. It just wanted me to come a little closer. I told myself I'd just drive out to Whitefish Point. Take in the lake, breathe, no camping, just a visit. But I ended up back in the woods anyway. Don't ask me how. I took a side road, gravel, poorly maintained, thinking it would lead to the lighthouse. It didn't. The map glitched, GPS stopped, and suddenly I was surrounded by trees again. The van sputtered once, twice, then died. I tried the key. Nothing. Dead. And from the forest came the light. Soft, orange, flickering. And this time it wasn't waiting. It was coming toward me. I reached for the ignition again. Nothing but silence, no click, no hum. The battery was fine this morning, no signs of drain, no warnings on the dash. But now the van was a tomb, still, powerless, and vulnerable. The trees around me held their breath. The leaves didn't rustle, no birds called. Even the insects had gone quiet, as if they knew something I didn't. Or worse, as if they remembered. The light moved between the trees like it had a mind. It wasn't fire. It didn't illuminate the trunks the way a flashlight would. It just hovered. Floating at chest height, weaving between the birches like it had lived there longer than anything else in that forest. It made no sound, but its movement felt like a whisper. I grabbed my backpack, shoved the essentials in, knife, headlamp, phone, even though I knew it was useless out here, and climbed out of the van. I thought maybe if I showed I wasn't afraid, if I stepped toward it instead of running, it would lose interest. I was wrong. The moment my boots hit the earth, the light stopped moving. It just hung there in front of me, as if waiting. My feet started to carry me forward before I even knew I'd decided to move. One slow step, then another. The silence felt alive, like it was watching me, waiting for a mistake. 20 feet in, and I could see it better now. The glow wasn't from a flame, it was from something. A shape. It shimmered like heat above asphalt, but it was solid, or it wanted me to think it was. And just behind it, partially hidden by shadow, was something else. That same silhouette. Tall, slightly hunched. Arms that didn't hang like a person's should, limbs too long for the torso. It was watching me with eyes I couldn't see but felt like cold hands on my spine. I froze. Then it moved. Not fast, not aggressive, but with absolute certainty. It stepped to the side, and the shimmering light pulsed brighter. I heard something then, a low hum. Not a machine, not an animal, more like something deep underground, waking up, vibrating through the soles of my boots, through my chest. My body screamed to run, but something else, something deep and quiet inside me whispered, "No, watch." And so I did. I stood there, barely breathing, as the figure reached into the shimmer and pulled. What came out looked like smoke, but it held its shape, like a memory of a person. No eyes, no mouth, just form, and then another, and another. Each one slightly different, each one shuddering like a candle in wind that wasn't there. They circled me, not fast, not close, just enough to trap me between them and the van. I didn't even notice my feet backing up until I bumped into the bumper. That's when I heard it again. Knock, 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 from behind me, from inside the van. My knees buckled and I dropped, hit the ground hard. My fingers clawed into the dirt and the smell hit me. Sulfur, sharp and sudden, like a match being struck in the center of my brain. My eyes watered, my throat clenched. When I looked up, they were gone. The shimmer, the forms, the figure, vanished. Like someone flipped a switch and erased the entire nightmare with one thought. The air moved again. Birds chirped, and the van's engine coughed to life on its own. I scrambled in, slammed the door shut, and jammed it into gear. I didn't care if I wrecked the transmission or peeled the tires off. I just needed distance. The dirt road unspooled behind me in streaks of brown and green. I didn't stop until I was at a Shell station just outside Newberry. I filled up even though I still had half a tank. Just being around fluorescent lights, the buzz of power lines, the smell of gasoline, it grounded me. It proved to me the world was still real. The clerk must have seen something in my face because he asked if I was okay. I lied, said I just had a bad scare with a bear. He nodded slowly. Happens out there sometimes, he said, but his eyes didn't match his voice. His eyes said he'd heard this kind of story before. I wanted to ask him about the light, the figure, the knocks, but I didn't, because something in me knew the moment I started putting words to it, it would follow me, and deep down I knew it already had. I camped in an RV park that night, one of those overlit family-friendly ones near the highway with trailers stacked side by side like sardines. I parked between two Winnebagos, both blasting country music and grilling burgers. I could barely sleep with all the noise, and I was grateful, because when I finally drifted off, I didn't hear the knocking. But I dreamed it. 3 soft raps, not on the van, not on the door, on the inside of my skull. I woke up in a sweat, hand gripping the knife I kept under the pillow. The moonlight glowed against the curtain fabric. Everything was still. And then I heard the whisper. One word, from somewhere I couldn't place. Maybe from the trees, maybe from inside me. Closer. I didn't sleep after that. By the next morning, I was packed and headed south. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't pull over to check the engine. I didn't even let myself think about camping again. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been invited into something, that the forest hadn't just shown me fear, it had chosen me. The forest hadn't just shown me fear, it had chosen me. That thought clung to me even hours down the road, long after cell signal returned and the sunlight lost its gold. I didn't feel lucky to be alive. I felt watched, and not from the rearview mirror or the brush on the shoulder of the road, watched from the inside. Like something had taken up space in me, waiting to surface. I drove until the trees gave way to suburbs, and the suburbs gave way to cities. I stayed in hotels, slept with the lights on, kept the van parked far away. I told myself it was over, that it was stress or hallucination or sleep deprivation. I stacked reasons like sandbags against a flood. But you can only lie to yourself for so long. 3 weeks later, I took the van to a mechanic, not because anything was wrong, but because I needed someone else to touch it, to open it, to look inside. When the guy came out to hand me my keys, he was pale. Said everything checked out mechanically. No shorts, no battery drain, but he looked rattled. Hey, this might sound weird, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Did you install something behind the side panel in the rear? My blood froze. No. Why? He shrugged uncomfortably. It's probably nothing. I just thought I saw something wedged back there, a bundle or something. But when I unscrewed the panel, it was gone. Gone. I drove away with my hands clenched so tight around the wheel, my knuckles turned white. I told myself it was just a mistake. He saw some insulation, a shadow, something benign. But that night, when I lay in bed, the knocking came back. Knock, knock, knock. This time from the closet in the hotel room. I sat upright, the sweat already pooling at the base of my neck. The room was silent, the kind of silence that screams. I didn't open the closet. I packed and left before the sun was up, speeding through red lights, crossing state lines without stopping. I couldn't outrun it. I stopped calling friends. I stopped posting online. I stopped talking about camping. That van, my freedom, my sanctuary, became a prison on wheels. I tried to sell it, put up listings, parked it with a for sale sign in a grocery store lot. No one even looked at it. The one guy who came to test drive it got in, sat behind the wheel for less than 30 seconds, then stepped out without a word and walked away. Just walked, like something inside had told him no. And that's when I understood. This wasn't a story about a bad night in the woods. This was a story about invitation, about how some places don't just exist, they reach out. Some forests don't let go. Some silence isn't absence, it's attention. I started having the dream again. Not just the knocking, but the light, that shimmer, always outside the van, always hovering just out of reach. Sometimes it moved like a heartbeat, other times it pulsed with the rhythm of breath. Once in the dream, I stepped out to meet it again. I thought maybe it wanted to show me something. But when I stepped into the trees, the earth swallowed me. The dream ended with dirt in my mouth and hands clawing up from beneath my ribs. And yet, a part of me missed it. Not the fear, not the confusion, but the clarity, the way the forest made me feel. Like I mattered. Like I'd been chosen for something ancient and indifferent and vast. It's hard to explain, but once you've been touched by something you can't explain, it changes what feels real, what feels enough. City lights feel hollow, conversations feel fake. Screens blur, traffic numbs, and under it all there's that whisper again, closer. It happened again last week. I was driving past a wooded area outside of Marquette, just passing through. I didn't stop, I didn't slow, but as the trees thickened along the road, I felt that pressure return, like the van weighed twice as much, like I was being drawn back in. The road curved, and for a moment, just a second, I saw it in my peripheral vision. That figure, still, waiting, watching from the edge of the trees. Only this time, it wasn't alone. There were 3 of them. And behind them, that shimmer pulsed once, like a signal, like a door. I kept driving. I didn't look back, but I haven't slept since. You can say it was all stress, trauma, some mix of fear and isolation. But I know what I felt, I know what I saw, and I know what I carry now. Not fear, not quite. It's deeper than fear. It's the knowledge that something out there sees me, that it's patient, that it waits. And I don't think it's done with me. I don't think it's done with any of us. If you ever find yourself in the northern woods of Michigan, past the highways, past the towns, deep enough that your phone dies and the trees start to lean in, listen closely, watch the light, and whatever you do, don't answer the knock. Not unless you're ready to leave something behind, because the forest doesn't just take you in, it keeps you forever. Before we start the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. When we first arrived at Shenandoah National Park, I remember thinking how peaceful it all was. The towering trees, the vast open skies, and the faint sound of birds singing in the distance. This was exactly the kind of break we all needed. I'm Alex, the planner of the group, and I'd organized this camping trip to get away from the stress of city life. Mark, my boyfriend, sat in the passenger seat beside me, relaxed and smiling as we made our way along the winding mountain road. Behind us in the RV were Jessica and Eric, my 2 closest friends. They weren't exactly the outdoorsy type, but they'd agreed to come along, maybe out of some sense of duty to reconnect. Eric was already cracking jokes about how bad he'd be at camping, while Jessica half laughed nervously, fiddling with her phone. I remember feeling so confident, so prepared. I'd planned everything, except of course for the things no one could plan for. We parked the RV at a small secluded site off the Appalachian Trail, far from the more populated areas. That was the whole point. Isolation, serenity, nature at its purest. The weather was supposed to be clear all weekend, perfect for hiking and camping. As we started setting up camp, the first signs of trouble were small. Jessica complained about her shoes. "These hiking boots are killing me. Chfers, why did I even buy them?" she groaned. "They're probably just stiff," I said, brushing her off. I was already focused on getting the tent up, but that's when I noticed Mark shaking his head. "The tent's missing poles," he said, laughing a little. "We'll have to use the RV for tonight." "Fine," I replied, hiding my frustration. Minor setbacks, nothing more. The real trouble began as dusk fell. It was subtle at first. As we sat around the small campfire Mark had built, the woods around us seemed to grow quieter. The bird song, once a pleasant background, faded into nothing. No wind stirred the leaves, and even the occasional sound of wildlife disappeared. I chalked it up to the natural rhythms of the forest, nocturnal creatures and all that. But then I noticed the smell. At first, it was faint. A whiff of something rotten, like spoiled meat. I thought maybe it was something in the air, or that something had died nearby. I didn't mention it, not wanting to freak anyone out. Eric, of course, was oblivious to the shift in mood. He was still joking around, telling some story about a horror movie he'd seen last week. "This place reminds me of one of those settings," he said, grinning as he poked at the fire. A group of friends in the middle of nowhere, and then bam, haunted by some spirit or creature. "Shut up," Jessica muttered, hugging her knees. "This place is creepy enough already." I rolled my eyes at them both. Sure to stuff, but Mark shifted uneasily beside me, glancing out into the darkening woods. I was about to ask him what was wrong when he stood up suddenly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I said, feeling a flicker of irritation. We'd barely been here a few hours, and they were already on edge. "I swear I heard something," he said, his voice tense, like footsteps, heavy coming from the woods. Eric laughed, but it was strained. "It's probably a bear or something, or maybe Bigfoot." Jessica looked pale, her eyes darting to the dark forest around us. "This isn't funny, guys." "It's nothing," I said firmly. "Just the woods settling down for the night. Let's not spook ourselves over nothing." But as the evening wore on, that smell of rot kept coming back, and so did the uneasy silence. Even the crackle of the fire felt muted. The next day was supposed to be better. We set out on the trail, hoping to shake off the weirdness of the night before. The weather was colder than expected, with a thick mist hanging low in the valley, making everything damp. Jessica slipped a few times on the muddy path, cursing under her breath. "This fog is so creepy," she muttered. Mark tried to lighten the mood. "It'll clear up once the sun's out. Let's just enjoy the hike." But I could tell he was uneasy too. None of us had slept well. Every time I drifted off, I thought I heard something moving outside the RV. Maybe it was my imagination, but something kept waking me up, like a low rustling or breathing. Halfway through the hike, we reached a lookout point. The fog had lifted just enough for us to see the rolling hills stretching out below us. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. Then I saw Mark, standing at the edge of the trees, staring into the distance. "Mark?" I called. He didn't answer. I walked over to him, a knot forming in my stomach. "What's wrong?" He pointed, his face pale. "Do you see that?" I squinted, looking where he was pointing. At first, I saw nothing but trees, but then something moved. A figure, tall and gaunt, barely visible through the mist. It stood completely still, as though it had been there the entire time, watching. "It's just a hiker," I said, though my voice sounded less confident than I'd hoped. "That's no hiker," Mark whispered. "Look at it." The figure stood too tall, its limbs too thin, and its skin seemed pale, almost translucent. But before I could get a better look, it was gone, melted into the fog. By the time we got back to the RV, the mood had soured. Mark was withdrawn, barely speaking, and Jessica kept glancing over her shoulder as though she expected something to jump out at us. The smell returned as we gathered around the campfire again that night. This time, it was stronger, more pungent, like decaying meat left out in the sun. Eric wrinkled his nose. "Okay, seriously, what is that?" "It's the woods," I said, though even I didn't believe it anymore. The silence pressed down on us like a weight, and then from deep in the trees we heard it, a voice, soft, distant, but unmistakably human. "Help me." We all froze. "What the hell?" Eric whispered, his eyes wide. The voice came again, a little closer. Help me." "It's someone in trouble," Mark said, standing up. "We need to go check." "No," I said, grabbing his arm. "We don't. That doesn't sound right." The voice was too calm, too controlled. There was no panic in it, no urgency. It sounded wrong, like it was echoing in the wrong direction. Jessica was shaking now, her face pale. "We have to leave. I don't like this." For once, Eric wasn't joking. "Yeah, maybe we should call it quits." But Mark was already moving toward the trees. "Mark, stop," I hissed, following him. "This is crazy." He didn't stop. He kept walking toward the voice, his expression blank, as if he were in a trance. I reached out, grabbing him and pulling him back, just as a figure emerged from the fog, the same gaunt figure we'd seen earlier. It stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly tall, its limbs too long, its eyes hollow black pits. My blood turned to ice. "What is that?" Jessica whispered, her voice trembling. The figure took a step forward, its body moving in a jerky, unnatural way, like it didn't know how to walk properly. Then, with a sickening crack, it twisted its head to the side, trapped, staring at us with those empty, soulless eyes. Mark stumbled back, snapping out of whatever trance had held him. We need to go now. The four of us rushed to the RV, slamming the door shut behind us. Outside, the figure circled the clearing, watching us, waiting. The next few hours were a blur of panic. We tried to start the RV, but the engine sputtered and died. The flashlight batteries drained within minutes. Every time we looked outside, the figure was there, standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. "We're trapped," Eric muttered, pacing the small space of the RV. "What the hell is that thing?" "It's not real," I said, though even I wasn't sure anymore. It can't be. But it was, and it wasn't going anywhere. Mark sat in the corner, his head in his hands. "It's the Wendigo," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "What?" I asked, staring at him. "The Wendigo," he repeated. "It's an old Native American legend, a spirit of insatiable hunger. It drives people mad, makes them turn on each other." "That's ridiculous," I said, but my voice shook. "I've heard of it," Eric said, his face pale. "It feeds on fear and hunger." A cold realization washed over me, the constant hunger we'd all been feeling, the strange cravings, the paranoia. Everything had started the moment we'd arrived. "It's trying to drive us mad," Mark said, his eyes wild. "That's why it hasn't attacked. It wants us to destroy each other." By the time night fell, the Wendigo was closer, standing just outside the RV, its gaunt, twisted face pressed against the window, its fingers tapping softly on the glass. Ainsley couldn't take it anymore. "I have to get out of here," she screamed, bolting for the door. "Wait," I shouted, but it was too late. She was already outside, running into the woods. We rushed after her, but the fog swallowed her whole. I could hear her screaming, her voice echoing through the trees, and then silence. We found her body a few minutes later. Her limbs were twisted, her face frozen in a mask of terror. The Wendigo stood over her, watching, its empty eyes locked on us. "We need to leave," Mark said, his voice shaking now. We stumbled back to the RV, but as we slammed the door shut, I saw the look in Mark's eyes. The hunger had taken hold of him. He was muttering to himself, his eyes darting toward me, then Eric. "He's not right," Eric whispered. "It's inside him." Mark lunged at me, his hands grasping at my throat. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't stop it." I struggled, pushing him off, and he collapsed to the floor, sobbing. Eric grabbed a metal pipe and stood over him, ready to strike if he tried again. "We have to get out of here," I said, my voice barely a whisper. The Wendigo was still outside, waiting. As we approached, the fog began to lift. We packed what little we could carry and made a run for it, leaving the RV behind. The Wendigo didn't follow. It just watched, its hollow eyes locked onto us as we disappeared down the trail. Even now, I can still feel its gaze, like it's always there, just beyond the edge of my vision, watching, waiting. I'll never go back to the wilderness again. Not after what I've seen. Not after what we've done. My name is Ainsley Campbell, and I'm 22 years old. This happened in late October last year during a camping trip I should have said no to. Looking back now, I wish I had trusted my instincts. But when your boyfriend insists and his plan includes his best friend in an RV, you shrug and say, "Sure, why not? What could possibly go wrong?" We were heading to the Glade Top Trail in Mark Twain National Forest, Missouri. It was one of those scenic, out-of-the-way places Travis found online while scouring for hidden gems. He was always chasing after some unspoiled piece of wilderness he could claim he'd conquered. He thought this trip would be perfect, a 4-day getaway with me, his best friend Eli, and Eli's sister, Hannah. I liked camping, but not like this. Not with Travis's demanding itineraries where relaxing meant hiking until your legs felt like jelly and eating instant noodles by firelight. Eli was just as much of a wild card. He was funny, sure, but in that irresponsible, forget everything important kind of way. And Hannah? Sweet girl, but quiet. She mostly stayed behind her camera, snapping pictures of sunsets and deer. The first day went smoothly enough. We parked the RV in a clearing off the trail, surrounded by trees turning gold and orange in the autumn chill. Travis was in his element, barking orders and setting up camp. Eli fumbled through his backpack, realizing he'd forgotten fuel for the portable stove. "Guess it's campfire cooking then," he joked, earning a glare from Travis. "Relax, man. It's just food." Hannah wandered off to take photos while Travis grumbled about having to adjust the meal plan. I tried to smooth things over, but I could feel the tension already brewing. That night, the forest came alive with strange sounds. The crackle of our fire barely masked the occasional rustling in the bushes or the distant hoots of owls. At one point, we heard whistling, high and sharp, like someone calling for a dog. We all froze. "Probably the wind," Travis said, poking the fire. Eli smirked. "Or a ghost. Isn't this place supposed to be haunted?" "Stop it," I snapped, but even I couldn't shake the chill that ran down my spine. The second day started with an ambitious hike. Travis insisted we take a trail that wasn't marked on the map, claiming it would lead to a hidden overlook. The trail was narrow and rocky, winding through dense trees that seemed to close in on us the further we went. Hannah stopped often to take pictures, capturing the way the light filtered through the leaves. She lingered behind, so I stayed with her while Travis and Eli forged ahead. I didn't mind the slower pace. Something about the forest felt off. The trees were too still, the silence too heavy. No birds chirped. No squirrels darted across the path. Just the crunch of our boots and the occasional click of Hannah's camera. By the time we caught up with the others, they were standing at the edge of a clearing, staring at something. A deer stood frozen in the middle of the trail, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. It didn't move even when we got closer. "That's weird," Hannah murmured, snapping a photo. "We should keep going," Travis said, his voice tight. The deer watched us as we passed, its dark eyes following our every step. That night, the unease deepened. While sitting around the campfire, a stranger appeared on the trail. He was an older man wearing a tattered coat and carrying a walking stick. He stopped just at the edge of the firelight, his face shadowed. "Evening," he said, his voice raspy. "You folks camping out here?" Travis nodded. "Yeah, why?" The man smiled faintly. "Just be careful. Some places in these woods don't take kindly to visitors." Before any of us could respond, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. Eli laughed nervously. "Well, that wasn't creepy at all." Travis brushed it off, but Hannah and I exchanged uneasy glances. Something about the man's words lingered in my mind. The third night was the worst. It started with voices, soft and indistinct, like someone whispering just out of earshot. I woke up in the RV, thinking it was one of the guys. But when I looked out the window, I saw a figure standing by the dying campfire. "Travis," I whispered, but he was asleep beside me. The figure turned its head toward the RV, and in the dim light, I thought I saw Eli's face. But something was wrong. The way he moved, jerky and unnatural, made my skin crawl. I shook Travis awake. "There's someone out there." He groaned and got up, peering out the window. By then, the figure was gone. "You're imagining things," he said, climbing back into bed. But I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Hannah showed us the photos she'd taken. One of them made my blood run cold. It was a shot of the clearing, but in the background, just beyond the trees, was a tall, distorted figure. Its limbs were too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. "Did you see this when you took it?" I asked, my voice shaking. Hannah shook her head. "No, I swear it wasn't there." Travis dismissed it as a trick of the light, but I could see the fear in his eyes. Eli, of course, made a joke about Bigfoot, but even he seemed unsettled. By the time night fell, we were all on edge. The forest felt alive, pressing in on us with an almost tangible weight. The whispers returned, louder this time, and they weren't just random sounds, they were calling our names. "Jennifer," a voice hissed, soft and familiar. I froze, gripping the edge of my seat. "Did you hear that?" Eli nodded, his face pale. It said my name too. Travis grabbed the hatchet we'd been using to chop firewood. "Stay here," he ordered, stepping outside. "Don't," I begged, but he didn't listen. Seconds stretched into minutes. Then we heard it, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the trees. Travis didn't come back. We locked the RV and huddled together, waiting for dawn. The thing outside clawed at the windows, whispering in Travis's voice, begging us to let it in. It wasn't until the first light of morning that the noises stopped. Hannah and I wanted to leave immediately, but the RV wouldn't start. Eli went outside to check the engine and didn't come back. When we finally worked up the courage to look for him, all we found was his jacket, shredded and stained with blood. Hannah and I fled on foot, following the trail back to the main road. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station hours later. When we tried to explain what had happened, the ranger just shook his head. "People go missing out there all the time," he said. "Best to stay away." As we drove home, I spotted a figure standing by the roadside. It looked like Eli, but his face was blank, expressionless. He raised a hand in a slow wave as we passed. "I haven't been back to the woods since. I don't think I ever will. Some places aren't meant for people. Some places belong to something else entirely." My name is Axel Norris, and I'm 19 years old. This happened along Paint Creek Scenic Trail in West Virginia during a trip I'd planned to reconnect with my art and, frankly, myself. It was supposed to be a peaceful escape from the noise of the world, but instead, it became something I still can't fully explain. I had just come off a long relationship that ended in the kind of breakup that leaves you questioning everything: your choices, your direction, your worth. Art was the only thing that felt steady, so I packed up my RV and hit the road. Paint Creek had come up in my research as a serene, lesser-known spot for nature lovers. I thought it would be the perfect place to spend a few days sketching and painting in solitude. When I arrived, the place was exactly as described: quiet, secluded, and hauntingly beautiful. The creek meandered through dense woods, its surface catching the sunlight like shards of glass. The leaves were just starting to turn, and the air carried a faint chill that hinted at the coming fall. I parked my RV near an old wooden bridge that crossed the creek. The bridge looked like it belonged in a ghost story, its weathered boards sagging slightly, but I couldn't resist its charm. I set up camp and spent the first day wandering the trails and sketching the landscape. The stillness was almost too perfect, but I chalked it up to being unused to this level of isolation. That night, I sat by the creek, working on a watercolor of the bridge as the sun dipped below the horizon. The forest around me grew darker, and the silence became oppressive. There were no birds, no insects, just the sound of the water trickling over rocks. I tried to focus on my painting, but a strange unease crept over me. It was like the air had shifted, growing heavier, colder. And then I heard it, a faint humming. It was soft at first, almost melodic, but it didn't seem to have a source. It wasn't coming from the creek or the woods, it was just there. I froze, my brush hovering over the paper. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and I realized it was a woman's voice humming a tune I didn't recognize. "Hello?" I called out, my voice breaking the stillness. The humming stopped abruptly, as if I had startled it. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. I told myself it must have been the wind or some trick of acoustics, packed up my supplies, and hurried back to the RV. The next morning, I woke to find my art supplies scattered across the ground outside the RV. My brushes were snapped in half, my paint spilled and smeared across the dirt. My first thought was that an animal had gotten into them, but there were no paw prints, no signs of disturbance, just the destruction itself. It didn't make sense. I spent the day trying to paint, but something felt off. The colors didn't look right. The lines felt shaky. Frustrated, I decided to take a break and explore more of the area. The old bridge drew me in again, its weathered planks creaking under my boots as I crossed. The creek below was impossibly still, its surface like a mirror reflecting the gnarled trees overhead. On the far side of the bridge, I noticed something etched into one of the trees, a name and a date carved deep into the bark. Margaret, 1893. The letters were uneven, as if done in haste, But what caught my attention was the feeling that swept over me as I touched the carving, a sudden, overwhelming sadness that didn't feel like my own. That night, the humming returned. I was inside the RV trying to sketch when I heard it again, drifting through the stillness. It was louder this time, unmistakable. The sound seemed to seep through the walls, wrapping around me like a cold embrace. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, my heart pounding. The air was icy, much colder than it had been earlier, and the forest was eerily quiet. The humming led me to the bridge, where the fog had thickened, shrouding the creek in an otherworldly glow. And then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the creek, her back to me. She wore a long dress, the kind you'd see in old photographs, and her hair cascaded down her back in dark waves. She was humming that same mournful tune, the sound weaving through the air like a spell. "Hello?" I called out, my voice trembling. She stopped humming but didn't turn around. I took a hesitant step closer, and as I did, she began to dissolve, her form breaking apart like mist until there was nothing left but the fog. I stood there, frozen, unsure if what I'd seen was real or some trick of the light and my overactive imagination. The next day, I decided to drive into town to clear my head. At a small gas station, I struck up a conversation with the attendant, an older man who seemed to know the area well. "You're camping by the bridge, aren't you?" he asked when I mentioned Paint Creek. "Yeah. Why?" He hesitated, then said, "People say it's haunted. They call her the Lady of Paint Creek. Story goes, she was abandoned by her husband during a harsh winter. He promised to come back for her, but he never did. She waited by that bridge until she froze to death. Now she haunts the creek, looking for people to join her." I laughed nervously, but his expression remained serious. "I'd avoid that bridge if I were you," he added, "especially at night." That evening, I couldn't stay away. Something about the Lady of Paint Creek drew me in like a moth to a flame. I set up my easel near the bridge, determined to capture her essence in my painting. As the hours passed and the sun dipped below the horizon, the fog rolled in again, and the humming returned. This time it was louder, more insistent. The air around me grew colder, and when I looked up, there she was, standing in the middle of the bridge. Her face was pale, almost translucent, and her hollow eyes bore into mine. She didn't move, but the humming turned into words, a whisper that sent chills down my spine. "Stay with me." I backed away, but my foot slipped on the wet grass, and I fell. When I looked up, she was gone, but the feeling of her presence lingered, heavy and suffocating. I grabbed my supplies and ran back to the RV, locking the door behind me. That night, I dreamed of her. In the dream, I was standing on the bridge, staring down at the icy water. She appeared beside me, her hand cold as she touched my arm. "He left me," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow. "They all leave." When I woke, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was still there, just beyond the edges of my vision. I knew I had to do something to end this, to break her hold on me. On my final night at Paint Creek, I returned to the bridge with my sketchbook and paints. The fog was thicker than ever, and the cold seeped into my bones. I set up my supplies and began to paint, my hands trembling as I worked. I painted her story, the bridge, the creek, her lonely figure waiting in the snow. As I finished, the humming surrounded me, and she appeared again, this time closer. Her hollow eyes were filled with tears, and she reached out a hand toward the painting. I stepped back, unsure of what to do. "You're remembered now," I said, my voice breaking. "You're not forgotten." She stared at the painting for what felt like an eternity. Then she dissolved into the mist, her presence lifting like a weight from my chest. The forest grew quiet again, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. I left Paint Creek the next morning, the painting tucked safely in the RV. It's one of my best works, but I've never been able to sell it. Something about it feels sacred, like it belongs to her. Even now, I hear her humming in my dreams. But it's softer now, almost peaceful, as if she's finally found rest. And maybe in a way, so have I. It had been 3 months since the divorce was finalized, and I was still trying to wrap my head around it. The life I had imagined, the woman I thought I would grow old with, it was all gone. That's why I decided to take the RV out to Mount Hood National Forest for a long weekend. I needed to get away from everything. No people, no reminders, just me and nature. My therapist said it would be good for me to clear my head and reconnect with something that didn't remind me of failure. Honestly, I didn't know if it would work, but I had to try something. If I stayed home, I would have just drowned myself in the silence of my empty apartment. This trip, I told myself, would be different. I could handle the quiet out here. I arrived in the late afternoon, pulling the RV into a spot near Timothy Lake. It was a beautiful area. Tall Douglas firs surrounded the lake like silent sentinels, the water reflecting the sky like a mirror. There were no other campers nearby, which was exactly what I wanted. Solitude. I parked, shut off the engine, and took a deep breath. The air was cool, crisp, with that faint scent of pine needles. Perfect. For a moment, I thought I could finally breathe again. After setting up a small campfire, I sat back in my foldable chair, staring at the fading light over the mountains. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. Peace, that's what I needed. But as the sun dipped lower, the quiet became overwhelming. There was no wind now, no rustling, no animal sounds, just me, sitting in a bubble of silence. I checked my watch. It was just after 6 p.m. That's when I noticed it. It was too quiet. The forest around me, which should have been alive with the sounds of birds and insects, was dead silent. At first, I figured it was just a lull, but as the minutes dragged on, the silence pressed down on me like a weight. I could hear the blood pumping in my ears, the soft crunch of every movement I made in my chair. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. I shrugged it off. Maybe this was what true isolation felt like. No noise, no distractions, just me and my thoughts. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement between the trees. It was subtle, a shadow slipping between the trunks, just far enough away that I couldn't get a good look. I froze, squinting into the woods. The firelight flickered, casting long shadows that played tricks on my mind. I scanned the tree line, waiting for the shadow to return, but saw nothing. The trees stood still, their branches unmoving in the dead air. Must be a deer, I muttered, forcing myself to relax. The wind picked up briefly, rustling the leaves. I sighed, relieved to hear some kind of noise again. I grabbed a few more logs and threw them onto the fire. The crackling wood was comforting, a reminder that I wasn't completely alone. I told myself I was just on edge from being out here, alone, with too much time to think. After eating a quick meal, I decided to call it an early night. The silence was getting under my skin, so I climbed into the RV, locked the door behind me, and settled into the small bed in the back. My phone had no signal, of course, but I wasn't planning on talking to anyone anyway. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to let my mind go blank, but the silence didn't let me rest. The RV was soundproofed, but even then, I felt like something was missing. No crickets, no owls, nothing. Just the absence of sound. I felt trapped inside my own head. Every little shift of the mattress or rustle of my blanket amplified in the quiet. Eventually, I drifted off. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up with a start. I wasn't sure why at first. There hadn't been any loud noises or nightmares, just silence. But something was wrong. My skin prickled with unease. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, and glanced around the RV. The windows were fogged up, and the air felt heavier, somehow oppressive. I heard something outside. No, that wasn't right. I heard nothing outside. I swung my legs out of bed and stood, listening closely. It was the strangest sensation, like my own breathing was distant, muffled, as though I wasn't entirely in my own body. I moved toward the window and wiped away some of the condensation with my sleeve, peering into the blackness beyond the RV. For a long time, I saw nothing, just trees and shadows, and then movement. This time, I was sure. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, just barely visible in the moonlight, tall, unnaturally still, like it was waiting for something. My heart leapt into my throat as I strained to see more clearly. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. "Hello?" I called, my voice shaky. The figure didn't respond. I backed away from the window, heart pounding, my mind racing. Was it another camper? Some kind of ranger? No, there was no way anyone would be out here this late without a sound. I checked the door. It was still locked. Good, but I felt exposed, vulnerable, knowing that whatever was out there was watching me. I grabbed the flashlight and shined it out the window, sweeping the beam across the clearing. The figure was gone. Just like that, vanished, as if it had never been there. The next morning, the forest was still eerily quiet. No birds, no animals, just the constant oppressive silence. I tried to shake off the unease from the night before, but it clung to me like a wet blanket. I told myself I was just paranoid, that the solitude was messing with my head, but something about the way the air felt today, something was off. I decided to take a short hike to clear my mind, hoping that getting out of the RV would make me feel better. But as I ventured down the trail, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every few minutes, I'd glance over my shoulder, expecting to see someone or something behind me. But the trail was empty. That's when I saw it again. A figure, this time in the distance, standing between the trees just off the trail. It was the same one from last night, tall, gaunt, and still. My heart hammered in my chest as I squinted, trying to make out more details. But before I could move, it slipped behind the trees and disappeared. I ran toward the spot where I'd seen it, my boots pounding against the damp earth. When I reached the trees, there was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing to show that anyone had been there at all. I stood there, catching my breath, feeling the silence pressing down on me like a vice. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest around me was completely still. Even my footsteps had stopped making noise. I stopped my boot on the ground, but I heard nothing, not even the crunch of leaves beneath my feet. Panic surged through me. I clapped my hands together. Nothing. No sound. My breathing was shallow, frantic, but it was like I was listening to it from far away. The world had gone completely, impossibly silent. And then I saw them. Not just one figure, but several, moving between the trees. Their bodies blended with the shadows. They were everywhere, circling me in complete silence. My heart raced, but I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything. I ran. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get away. My legs felt heavy, every step muted, like I was running underwater. The forest shifted around me, the trail disappearing into the thick fog that had rolled in, disorienting me further. Somehow, I made it back to the RV. I slammed the door shut, locking it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but still no sound. I grabbed my phone, hoping to call for help, but it was useless. The screen flickered, the GPS spinning in circles. I was trapped. For the next few hours, I stayed inside the RV, pacing back and forth, trying to calm myself down, but the silence never lifted. I couldn't even hear my own thoughts anymore, just the crushing weight of nothingness. And then, as the light began to fade, I saw them again, the silent ones. They were standing in a circle around the RV, their faces blank, their eyes hollow. There were no features, no mouths, just smooth skin where their faces should have been. They stood perfectly still, watching me through the windows, their bodies unnervingly thin and elongated. I banged on the window, screaming, but of course, no sound came. They didn't flinch, didn't move. They just stared, waiting. Desperation clawed at me. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave. But the RV wouldn't start. Every time I tried, the engine sputtered and died, as if something was draining the life out of it. I grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping outside. The silent ones didn't move, didn't react. But as I walked toward them, the air grew colder, the silence even more oppressive. My footsteps made no sound. My breathing was barely there. I felt a hand on my shoulder and spun around, expecting to see one of them behind me, but there was nothing, just the fog swirling around me and the figures waiting in the distance. In that moment, I realized what they wanted. They weren't going to kill me. No, that would be too simple. They wanted me to join them, to become one of them, The silence wasn't just the absence of sound, it was a part of them, and it was seeping into me, stealing my voice, my thoughts, my very sense of self. And if I stayed here much longer, I knew I would lose everything. I don't remember how I made it out. The next thing I knew, I was driving far away from the campsite, from the silent ones. The sound of the engine, the tires on the road, it was all faint, like I was still caught in their grip. But at least there was something, a reminder that I hadn't completely disappeared into that silence. It's been weeks since I got back, but I can still feel it. The quiet follows me, lingers in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes when I'm lying in bed at night, I can feel their eyes on me, watching, waiting, and I know that one day they'll come for me again. This time, I won't be able to run. My name is Beckham Anderson, and this happened to me on September 3rd, 1999. I was driving my RV through the dense forests of northern Idaho, seeking a weekend of peace and solitude. My wife, Jennifer, had recently left me, and I needed time to clear my head. The plan was to find a secluded spot near a lake and spend a few days fishing and reflecting. I found the perfect spot near Priest Lake, miles away from the nearest town. I parked my RV, set up my fishing gear, and lit a small campfire. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the water. The tranquility of the place began to seep into my bones, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a semblance of peace. As darkness fell, I noticed a faint rustling in the underbrush. It was probably just a deer or a raccoon. I shrugged it off and went inside the RV to prepare dinner. While I was cooking, I heard the sound again, closer this time. I stepped out, flashlight in hand, and scanned the trees. Nothing, just the quiet chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl. The next day, I woke early and spent the morning fishing. The lake was calm, and I managed to catch a couple of trout. By noon, I was back at the campsite grilling the fish for lunch. I had just settled down to eat when I heard a loud crack like a branch snapping, followed by a low guttural sound. This time, it was unmistakable. Something was out there, watching me. I grabbed my flashlight and knife and ventured into the woods. The underbrush was thick, and visibility was poor. I moved slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. After a few minutes, I found the source of the sound. A large branch lay broken on the ground, its splinters scattered around, but there was no sign of any animal. Feeling uneasy, I returned to the campsite. The rest of the day passed without incident, but the feeling of being watched never left me. That night, I locked the RV door and double-checked the windows. I kept the knife close by, just in case. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by a loud thud against the side of the RV. I jumped up, hard pounding, and listened. Silence. Then another thud, this time on the roof. I grabbed the flashlight and knife and climbed the ladder to the roof hatch. Slowly, I pushed it open and shone the light around. The beam caught a glimpse of something moving, but it was too fast to see clearly. It disappeared, peering into the trees, leaving me with only the echo of its footsteps. I climbed down and decided it was time to leave. I started packing up my things, moving quickly but quietly. Suddenly I heard a scream. It was a human scream, coming from deeper in the woods. My blood ran cold. I hesitated, torn between the urge to help and the fear of what might be out there. This scream came again, more desperate this time. I couldn't ignore it. I grabbed the flashlight and knife and ran toward the sound. The woods were dark and disorienting, but I followed the screams until I reached a small clearing. There I found a man, bloodied and barely conscious, lying on the ground. His clothes were torn, and he had deep gashes across his chest. "Help me," he gasped, his voice weak. I knelt beside him and tried to assess his injuries. "What happened?" I asked. It got me," he whispered. "We have to get out of here." I helped him to his feet, and we made our way back to the campsite. He was in bad shape, and I knew we needed to get him to a hospital. I managed to get him into the RV and started driving toward the nearest town. As we drove, he told me his name was Tom and that he had been hiking with his girlfriend when they were attacked by something. He didn't get a good look at it, but it was fast and strong. We reached the hospital in Sandpoint, and I explained what happened to the staff. They they took Tom in immediately, and I was left in the waiting room, trying to make sense of everything. After a few hours, a doctor came out and told me that Tom would survive, but he was in critical condition. His girlfriend was still missing. I stayed in Sandpoint for a few days, hoping for news about Tom's girlfriend. The local authorities organized a search party, and I joined them. We combed the area around Priest Lake, but found no trace of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. One evening, as I was sitting in a local diner, I overheard a conversation between two old-timers at the next table. They were talking about an old legend, something they called the Wendigo. According to them, it was a creature that lived in the forests, preying on humans. The description matched what little I had seen of the thing that attacked Tom. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Whatever it wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something dangerous. I decided to leave Idaho and never look back. I sold the RV and moved to a small town in Oregon, trying to put the whole ordeal behind me. But the memories never faded. I kept in touch with Tom, who eventually recovered, but he was never the same. The trauma of that night haunted him, and he struggled to move on. Years passed, and I tried to forget about what happened, but every now and then I'd hear stories about people going missing in the forests of Idaho, and I knew deep down that the Wendigo was still out there, waiting. One night, years later, I was sitting in my small Oregon home when I got a call from Tom. He sounded frantic, his voice shaking. "Beckham, it's back. I saw it." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. I was hiking near Priest Lake again. I thought it was all in my head, but it's real. It's real, and it's still there. I felt the chill run down my spine. "Tom, you need to stay away from there." I know, but I had to see it for myself. I had to know if it was real. I could hear the fear in his voice, and it brought back all the memories of that night. "Tom, promise me you won't go back there." "I promise," he said, but I could tell he didn't mean it. The call ended, and I sat there in silence, staring at the phone. I knew Tom would go back. He was drawn to that place, just like I had been, and I knew he wouldn't be the last. A few weeks later, I got a call from Tom's sister. He had gone missing again, and this time they didn't find a body, just a trail of blood leading into the woods. I hung up the phone and sat in silence, the weight of it all crashing down on me. Tom was gone, and I knew he wouldn't be coming back. I decided to write down my story to warn others about the Wendigo. Maybe if people knew the truth, they would stay away from those cursed woods, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. The forest had a way of drawing people in, and the Wendigo would always be there, waiting. So, if you ever find yourself near Priest Lake, remember my story. Stay away from the woods and never ever go looking for the Wendigo, because once you see it, you'll never be the same again. Years have passed since then, and I've tried to move on with my life, but every time I close my eyes, I see those woods. I see Tom's bloodied face, and I hear the screams. The Wendigo took more than just my peace of mind. It took my friend, and it took a part of me that I'll never get back. So if you're ever out in the woods and you hear a rustling in the trees, don't ignore it. Be careful, because the Wendigo is still out there, and it's always watching, always waiting. And once it finds you, there's no escaping. This is my story, and I hope it serves as a warning. Stay safe, and never underestimate the darkness that lurks in the heart of the forest. My name's Brixton Gibson, and back in 2012, I took my RV up to the Uncompahgre National Forest in Colorado to get a bit of solitude. I figured a few days in the quiet woods was what I needed after a brutal stretch at my job. That, and a chance to unwind and catch up on some reading I'd been putting off for too long. The campsite was perfect, a little slice of isolation in a pine grove near a mountain stream. There weren't any other campers around, just the way I liked it. After parking, I set up a small fire pit, rolled out a camp chair, and opened a cold beer. It wasn't until dusk that I noticed the first strange thing. Hanging from a tree just outside the edge of the camp was a bundle of what looked like animal bones tied together with rough twine. I remember squinting at it, trying to figure out if I was looking at some kind of decoration or a hunter's marker. I shrugged it off, figuring it was something left behind by previous campers, maybe someone with an odd sense of humor. But as night settled in, there was a strange tension in the air, a feeling like the forest was aware. That's the best way I can put it. And then there was a sound, a low, distant snap of a branch. Now, I'd done plenty of camping, so I knew the usual sounds. Animals rustling, branches falling, even the distant howl of a coyote or two. But this wasn't that. It felt deliberate, calculated, like someone was creeping around my campsite, observing me. I called out, maybe hoping it was another camper who had just happened upon the spot. Silence. Not even the crickets joined in. Figuring it was probably my own nerves getting the best of me, I settled back in my chair, trying to brush it off. Maybe I even laughed a little, reminding myself I was out here to relax. But then, just as I was starting to unwind, another noise cut through the night. This time, it was closer, and it didn't sound natural. It was a low, whispering voice somewhere in the trees. I couldn't make out the words, but it had a strange rhythm, almost like a chant. I froze, listening harder, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from. A chill crept up my spine, and I cursed myself for not bringing anything stronger than a pocket knife. Then there was a flash of movement. I turned my flashlight toward the trees and saw him, a man standing just outside the ring of light. He was gaunt, dressed in layers of old, tattered clothes that looked like they hadn't seen a washing machine in years. His face was twisted in a wild grin, eyes wide with something that looked too intense to be curiosity. I called out, asking if he was lost, but he didn't answer. He just stared, that grin plastered on his face. I started getting that sinking feeling in my stomach, realizing I wasn't dealing with some lost hiker. This guy was here for a reason, and I had a strong feeling it had nothing to do with friendly campfire company. Without a word, he stepped back into the darkness, vanishing from sight, leaving me alone with my racing thoughts and that damn silence. I glanced around, debating if I should pack up and leave. But the road back was rough, and I wasn't eager to navigate it in the dark. So I went back into the RV, locking the door behind me. I grabbed a flashlight and a steak knife, the best I could manage at the time. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak, every rustle outside set me on edge. Hours seemed to pass with that quiet tension hanging thick in the air. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard scratching at the door. Not loud, but enough to make the hair on my arms stand up. I held my breath, my hand gripping the flashlight tightly, ready to hit anything that came through. Then the door handle rattled. I don't remember deciding to open the door, but somehow I did. And there he was, standing right there, so close I could smell him, a rank mix of sweat and earth. His eyes darted around the inside of the RV before locking onto me. He didn't say anything, but that twisted grin returned. I forced out some words, telling him to leave, that I'd call the cops if he didn't back off. Still, he just stood there, staring. Then, in the most casual way you could imagine, he reached into his coat and pulled out a rusty hunting knife, the kind that looked like it had seen more than just a few animals. "Nice place you got here," he rasped, his voice as rough as gravel. I tried to shut the door, but he wedged his foot in, the grin widening. Panic started to claw at me. I shoved the door as hard as I could, finally managing to get it closed, hearing his foot crunch. His scream of pain echoed through the trees, and it was the most human sound I'd heard from him all night. I'd like to say I felt bad, but survival has a way of dulling empathy. It went quiet after that. I stood by the door, my heart pounding, flashlight in one hand and that ridiculous steak knife in the other, just waiting. A minute later, I heard footsteps circling the RV. Slow, deliberate, as if he was daring me to come out. Then I smelled smoke. I ran to the tiny window at the back and saw flames licking up the side of the RV, catching on the dry pine needles he'd buy, had lit my RV on fire. Probably thinking he could smoke me out like some kind of animal, and judging by the wild look in his eyes earlier, he wasn't doing this for kicks. This was personal. I grabbed a blanket, threw it over my shoulder, and kicked the emergency exit open, rolling out into the dirt. The flames were climbing. And as I scrambled to my feet, I saw him, standing in the shadows, holding something in his hands. It was my backpack. Must have grabbed it while I was distracted. But it wasn't just the backpack. Hanging from his other hand was something that made my blood run cold. A severed hand, limp, dripping. The nails were caked with dirt. And I recognized the wristband on it. It was from a kid I'd seen camping with his family a few miles down the trail earlier that day. My mind reeled. I wanted to turn, to run, but I couldn't. The twisted satisfaction on his face as he held that hand was paralyzing. I don't know what kind of person it takes to do something like that, but I knew I didn't stand a chance if I tried to reason with him. He tossed the hand to the ground between us, as if he was offering me some kind of twisted trophy. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't just about scaring me. This guy was a predator, someone who'd done this before, and planned to do it again. I backed up slowly, and he matched me. Step for step, that knife glinting in his hand. I could feel my pulse hammering, knowing that if I made one wrong move, he'd close the gap in an instant. My options were narrowing by the second. Then I remembered the emergency flare in my pocket. I fumbled it out, not daring to take my eyes off him. With a quick flick, I sparked it to life. The bright red light flared up between us, casting long shadows across his face. For the first time, he looked uncertain. It was just enough. I sprinted, hurling the flare behind me, hoping the light and heat would buy me a few seconds. I tore down the trail, lungs burning, not daring to look back. I didn't stop running until I saw the lights of a ranger station up ahead. I stumbled in, gasping, barely able to get the words out. By the time the rangers got to my campsite, my RV was a charred skeleton, and there was no sign of him. All they found was a pile of bones, some still smoldering, and a tattered piece of cloth with a name stitched into it. Later, they told me, he'd been living out in those woods for years, scavenging from campers, picking them off, one by one. They called him the Hermit of Uncompahgre, a ghost story turned real. As for me, I've never been back, and I don't plan to. The forest was supposed to be my escape. I drove the RV deep into the Blue Ridge Mountains, hoping the solitude would offer some kind of peace. I had been out here a few times before, never this deep, though, but it had always been calming. Nature had a way of quieting the noise in my head. After I left the job, the silence became my companion, even though it haunted me with memories I wasn't ready to face, the accident that had ended my career as a paramedic. Every night, it replayed in my mind, always the same horrific details. But with each viewing, I saw a new way I could have saved the child. A different decision, a split second sooner, and maybe it didn't matter. I was here now, alone. The sound of the gravel crunched under my tires as I parked off an old dirt road. It was oddly satisfying. I turned off the engine, and for a moment, there was bliss. No noise except for the rustle of trees in the wind. This was what I needed. No sirens, no screaming. Just the mountains. I grabbed my bag and climbed out, stretching my legs before heading over to the old fire lookout tower nearby. It was a relic, long abandoned and forgotten by most hikers. The wood was graying, peeling away from years of exposure, but it stood firm, a silent sentinel watching over the rolling hills. Something about the place had always intrigued me. It had a gravity to it, like it was holding secrets that only those who ventured close enough could learn. I planned to spend the weekend here, at least 3 days before I had to go back to reality. I didn't need much, just the stillness, the mountains, and a break from the memories. I set up camp near the RV, built a small fire, and tried to let go. But the quiet was different this time. The first night, it started with whispers. I was sitting by the fire, watching the flames flicker against the trees, when I thought I heard voices, not nearby, but carried on the wind. Faint, like a conversation just out of reach. I strained to listen, but they faded, lost in the rustle of the leaves. Probably just my mind playing tricks, I told myself. I hadn't slept well in weeks, and the quiet, while peaceful, was unnerving in its own way. After a while, I retreated to the RV, exhausted, but the voices lingered in the back of my mind, soft murmurs that tugged at my thoughts. As I lay down, I told myself it was nothing, just echoes of people who had camped here long before. The wind could carry sounds in strange ways out here. But the deeper I fell into sleep, the louder they grew, until I jerked awake, covered in sweat. There were no voices, just the oppressive weight of silence. I stared at the ceiling, the same question running through my mind. Was this peace or something else? The next morning, things started to get strange. I woke to find my watch blinking, frozen at 2:47 a.m. I tapped the screen a few times, but it refused to budge. Strange. When I checked my phone, it was dead, despite being fully charged the night before. I chalked it up to bad luck, but when I stepped out of the RV, the sun seemed higher in the sky than it should have been. It was late morning, but it felt like I had only just fallen asleep. I spent the day hiking, keeping my mind occupied. The trail was familiar. I'd hiked this ridge before, but something about it felt different. Landmarks I swore I'd seen on the way up seemed out of place, or worse, missing. And every time I thought I was making progress, I'd find myself right back where I started. The same twisted tree, the same rock formation, a loop. The disorientation didn't set in all at once. It was a slow, creeping unease that settled in my bones. The wind felt wrong too, as if it was carrying something. I couldn't quite hear those whispers again. Faint, distorted, carried on the breeze. This time, they were closer. By nightfall, the voices were louder. They weren't whispers anymore, but full conversations, disembodied words spoken in tones I couldn't place. It was like someone was just out of view, talking, laughing. At first, I stayed by the fire, trying to block it out, but the longer I sat there, the clearer the voices became. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was as if they were replaying over and over, fragments of words lost on the wind. I stood up, scanning the tree line. Shadows flickered just beyond the light of the fire. My breath caught in my throat. "Hello?" I called, my voice cracking in the stillness. No answer. The hairs on my neck stood up as I watched the shadows shift, a figure. It moved between the trees, far enough that I couldn't see clearly, but close enough to make my pulse quicken. My first thought was that it was another hiker, maybe someone lost. But when I took a step toward it, it vanished, gone, as if it had never been there. I grabbed my flashlight, pointing it into the woods. But the beam of light revealed nothing but trees. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks again, but my gut told me otherwise. There was something here, something I didn't understand. I retreated to the RV, locking the door behind me, but even inside, the silence was heavy. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening. The voices were still there, faint now, but constant. It felt like someone was standing just outside the RV, talking in circles, over and over. The next morning, I hiked to the old fire lookout. I don't know why. Something about the tower drew me in, like I needed to be there. It was old, dilapidated, and crumbling, but it held a strange power. When I reached the top, I could see for miles. The Blue Ridge Mountains stretched out in every direction, green and endless. I expected to feel some sense of peace, but instead, a deep dread settled in my chest. The lookout wasn't empty. It was filled with the remnants of people who had come here before me. Old camping gear, torn sleeping bags, cans of food long since expired, graffiti scratched into the wooden beams, names etched into the walls. And something else, carved into the center of the floor, was a symbol, a crude spiral, looping in on itself. I knelt down, running my fingers over the grooves. It looked old, weathered, like it had been there forever. The voices returned, this time louder, clearer. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the tower was empty. just the wind whistling through the cracks in the wood. I ran my hands through my hair, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was very wrong here. The ridge, the lookout, it wasn't just an old campsite. It was a trap, a loop, and I was stuck in it. I tried to leave that afternoon, packed up the RV, started the engine, and drove down the winding road that had brought me here. But no matter how far I drove, the landscape didn't change. The trees, the rocks, it all blurred together. The same stretches of road repeating over and over. After what felt like hours, I found myself back at the campsite, the fire now cold and dead, sitting in the exact same spot. My heart sank. I tried again. This time I took a different route, but once again the RV looped back to the same spot. It was as if the mountain wouldn't let me leave. By nightfall, I knew the truth. The whispers weren't random. They weren't in my head. They were echoes. Echoes of the past, of people who had been here before me, people who had tried to leave and failed. I sat in the RV, staring out the window at the darkening woods. The figures had returned. This time there were more of them. They moved between the trees, watching me, waiting. One by one, they stepped into the clearing surrounding the RV. I could see them now, faded, distorted, like shadows of people long gone. Their faces were blank, their movements slow and deliberate. They said nothing, but I could hear them. Their voices, the same words looping over and over. I backed away from the window, my hands shaking. This was it. I was stuck, trapped in their endless loop, just like they were. The door creaked open. I don't remember what happened next, only that I woke up the next morning, sitting by the cold, dead fire. The RV door was wide open, the woods empty and still. But the whispers were gone, for now. I don't know how long I've been here. Days, weeks, time doesn't seem to work the same way anymore. Every time I think I'm getting closer to an answer, I find myself right back where I started. I'm not alone on this ridge. There are others, I can hear them sometimes, their voices echoing. My name is Kate Anderson, but everyone calls me Sousa. I'm 26 years old, and last fall I made the worst mistake of my life. I thought I was just going on another camping trip. I thought I needed peace, time to think, and space to heal after my divorce. But what I found in the Hercules Glades wilderness wasn't peace. It was something else entirely, something I still can't explain. This happened in October. The air was crisp, the leaves were fiery shades of red and orange, and the world felt quiet as though it were holding its breath. I packed up my RV, a trusty old Ford I'd refurbished myself, and headed to a remote spot deep in the forest. I'd heard about the area from some travel blog. It mentioned breathtaking glades and a challenging hike to a place called Devil's Hollow. Perfect for someone who wanted to be alone, or so I thought. The drive was beautiful but isolating. The farther I got from civilization, the narrower the roads became. I didn't pass another car for miles. When I finally reached the ranger station at the edge of the wilderness, I was greeted by an older woman with sharp, watchful eyes. Her name tag read Maggie. "You're going all the way out to Devil's Hollow?" she asked, her voice tinged with concern. I shrugged. "That's the plan. Heard it's beautiful." "It's cursed," she said flatly. "Bad things happen there." I laughed nervously, unsure if she was joking. She wasn't. Her expression didn't change. "If you must go, stay out of the glade after sundown," Maggie warned. "The forest takes what it's owed." I brushed off her words as local folklore and left, eager to set up camp before dark. I parked the RV in a clearing not far from the main trail. The spot was perfect, quiet, secluded, and surrounded by towering trees that swayed gently in the breeze. I spent the evening setting up camp, cooking over a small fire, and trying to convince myself I'd made the right decision coming out here. The first sign of trouble came as I was falling asleep. I heard it faintly at first, a soft rustling outside the RV. Probably an animal, I thought, but then came the whispering. It wasn't words exactly, just faint, indistinct murmurs that seemed to circle the RV. I sat up, my heart pounding. The sound stopped as soon as I turned on the lights. "It's nothing," I whispered to myself, "just your imagination." The next morning, I decided to hike to Devil's Hollow. It wasn't an official trail, which made it harder to navigate. My compass acted strangely, spinning lazily as if it couldn't find north. I chalked it up to a malfunction and kept going, using the sun to guide me. About halfway there, I ran into a man carrying a hunting rifle. He was tall and weathered, with a face that looked like it had seen more than it cared to. "You shouldn't be here," he said, blocking my path. "It's a public park," I replied, trying to sound confident. He shook his head. "Not this part. The glade isn't safe." "Why?" I asked, more annoyed than scared. His eyes narrowed. "You won't believe me if I tell you. Just don't stay out here after dark." Before I could respond, he turned and disappeared into the trees. When I finally reached Devil's Hollow, I understood why people talked about it the way they did. The place didn't feel right. It was too quiet, no birds, no insects, just an oppressive, eerie silence. The glade was a wide open space surrounded by gnarled trees. In the center was a patch of scorched earth, as though a fire had burned there long ago. I took a few pictures, but my unease grew with every passing minute. Something about the air felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my chest. I noticed strange symbols carved into the trees, circles, triangles, and spirals I couldn't decipher. By the time I made it back to camp, the sun was dipping below the horizon. That night, the whispers returned. They were louder this time, circling the RV like a predator stalking its prey. Then came the footsteps, soft, deliberate, and far too human for comfort. I locked the doors and peered through the window, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. The beam caught a shadowy figure standing just at the edge of the clearing. It didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there watching. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound brave. The figure tilted its head unnaturally, and my blood turned to ice. The next morning, I found footprints around the RV, barefoot prints too large to be human. My supplies were disturbed, and one of my chairs was gone. I decided I couldn't stay another night, but when I tried to start the RV, the battery was dead. No lights, no engine, nothing. Panic began to set in. That afternoon, I ventured back to the glade, hoping to find cell service or someone who could help. Instead, I found more signs of the supernatural, items scattered around the glade, a rusted pocket watch, a child's shoe, a shattered compass. None of them looked recent. Then I heard it, a voice calling my name, "Souza." It was faint, but unmistakable. My blood ran cold. The voice wasn't coming from a person, it was coming from the trees. By nightfall, the spirits grew bolder. The RV shook violently as something clawed at the walls. The whispers turned into screams, familiar voices, voices from my past. My ex-husband's voice rang out, cruel and mocking, echoing words he'd once said to me in anger. "You're nothing without me." I covered my ears, rocking back and forth, but the voices wouldn't stop. When the door to the RV slammed open, I grabbed a piece of firewood and ran. The forest seemed to shift as I fled, paths twisting and looping back on themselves. The shadows followed me, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke. I stumbled into the glade, clutching the firewood like a weapon. In the center of the scorched earth was a book, a diary, its pages filled with frantic, illegible writing. Desperate, I tore out a page and lit it with my lighter. The moment the page burned, the shadows recoiled, screaming in a deafening chorus. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing on the road just as a pair of headlights appeared in the distance. A ranger found me and took me to the station. I tried to explain, but my story sounded insane, even to me. Maggie was there, her expression unreadable. "You burned the book, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, too shaken to speak. She sighed. "It won't be the last time someone stumbles into Devil's Hollow. The forest always takes what it's owed." As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror. Standing at the edge of the forest was the same shadowy figure, its head tilted, watching me leave. I don't camp anymore. Some places aren't meant for people. Some places belong to something else entirely. I wasn't running away from my problems. I was just trying to get some space. That's what I told myself, at least, after the divorce. Everything felt too close, too suffocating. the paperwork, the empty house, the awkward conversations with friends who didn't know how to bring it up. I needed to get away. And what better way than a solo trip into the wilderness? Dead Man's Creek sounded like the perfect place to clear my head. A name so bleak it made the reality of my situation seem trivial. Just me, my dog Max, and the open road. I'd driven the RV deep into Wyoming's Wind River Range, far from the trails and tourists. That's what I wanted. Solitude. I found a spot off the grid and well off the beaten path. The closest human was probably miles away, which suited me just fine. I set up camp near a bend in the creek, the water dark and slow, reflecting the towering pines above. The quiet was absolute, and I felt something like relief as I stood there, staring out at the wilderness, Max sniffing the ground beside me. "This is it, boy," I said, running my hand through his thick fur. "Just us, no distractions." Max wagged his tail, but his ears were perked, listening to the subtle sounds of the forest. The place was still, too still, but that's what I wanted, wasn't it? Peace. Quiet. No one to tell me what I'd done wrong or how I'd lost everything, just the wide open woods and the whisper of the creek. The first night was fine, quiet, uneventful. I cooked a simple meal over the campfire, Max stretched out at my feet. The stars were sharp and cold in the sky, and for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But that peace didn't last. The second night, I noticed it, the silence. Not the calming, tranquil kind, but a deeper, unnatural stillness. There was no rustling of leaves, no chirping of crickets, no movement in the trees, just the crackling of the fire and the low, constant murmur of the creek. Max, who usually dozed off by now, was alert, staring out into the dark, his ears flat against his head. "What is it, boy?" I asked, standing up and scanning the tree line. Nothing but shadows stretching between the pines. Still, Max didn't relax. His body was stiff, and every few seconds, he'd let out a low growl, his gaze fixed on something I couldn't see. I grabbed the flashlight from the RV and shone it toward the woods, sweeping the beam across the darkness. Just trees. No glowing eyes, no movement. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding and relaxed. Probably just a deer or something. But Max didn't relax. He growled again, deeper this time. His fur bristled. The flashlight flickered. A cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it a faint smell. Something rotten, like decayed meat left out in the sun. I wrinkled my nose, holding my breath for a moment. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that the wilderness was full of strange smells, but the hairs on the back of my neck were standing up. I tossed another log onto the fire. The flames flared up with a loud crack. For a moment, the smell faded and the wind died down. Max settled a little but remained close to me, never taking his eyes off the woods. It was only later, when I was lying in bed in the RV, that I heard it, soft at first, like a distant whisper. Crying. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound drifted through the trees, carried on the wind, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a woman crying. My first thought was that maybe someone was out there, lost in the woods. But no one else should be anywhere near this area. I hadn't seen a single car, a single hiker. Nothing. "Help me." The voice was faint, almost drowned out by the murmur of the creek. But it was there, clear as day. Max growled again, this time from his spot at the foot of the bed. He was staring at the door now, his body tense, ears flat. I grabbed the flashlight from the counter and crept toward the door. My heart was pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to stay inside, to lock the door and ignore whatever was out there. But that voice, it was so desperate. I opened the door slowly, stepping out into the cool night air. The flashlight flickered to life, the beam cutting through the darkness. The crying had stopped. The forest was still again, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud, too human for this unnatural quiet. "Is anyone there?" No answer, just the sound of the creek and the rustling of the trees. Max stayed at my side, his growl low and steady. Then I saw them, footprints. Large, old-fashioned boot prints in the damp soil near the creek's edge. They weren't mine, and they certainly weren't recent. The edges of the prints were weathered, as if they'd been there for weeks. But that was impossible. I backed up, my heart pounding, pulling Max with me. I didn't sleep much that night, the echo of the crying woman replaying in my head. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all in my mind. Too many nights alone in the wilderness, maybe a little too much whiskey by the fire. But something gnawed at me, those boot prints, the voice, the smell of rot. Something was wrong here. I needed answers. I spent the afternoon hiking deeper into the woods, staying close to the creek. That's when I found it, an old campsite, or what was left of one at least. A broken-down wagon, rusted tools scattered in the dirt, and a few rotting planks of wood that might have once been part of a shelter. As I looked closer, I spotted something in the dirt, a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. Carefully, I opened it, flipping through the delicate pages. The writing was faded, but I could make out enough. It belonged to a woman, a pioneer by the sound of it, who had traveled west with her family. They had camped near Dead Man's Creek, just like I had. Her entries were brief at first, describing their journey and the hardships they faced. But the later entries grew darker, more frantic. The cold is setting in. We lost Joseph last night. He wandered too far from the fire, and we couldn't find him. I hear him sometimes calling out to me from the trees, but when I go to him, he's not there. My children, they're gone too, taken by the woods, by the creek. I can't leave. I have to find them. I have to. The final entry trailed off, the ink smudged as if the writer had been interrupted. My stomach turned, and a chill crawled down my spine. I knew the legend of the crying woman, how she had lost her family in these woods and now wandered them, searching for her lost loved ones. I'd heard it mentioned in passing by locals when I'd asked for directions to the creek, but I'd brushed it off as folklore. But now, I wasn't so sure. That night, the crying returned, but this time it was closer, louder. The weeping echoed through the trees, wrapping around the RV like a thick fog. "Help me, please." Max growled, his hackles raised as he paced near the door. I sat at the table, gripping the edge with white knuckles, my heart racing. The woman was out there, and she knew I was here. The RV began to shake, the windows rattling as if something or someone was moving around outside. I grabbed the flashlight and stood up, my pulse pounding in my ears. I couldn't stay inside forever. I opened the door. The flashlight beam cut through the dark. The crying stopped, but the air was thick with tension. The rotten smell was back, stronger this time, like it was coming from just a few feet away. And then I saw her. She stood at the edge of the trees, her figure barely visible in the flickering light of the campfire. Her skin was pale, her clothes torn and stained with dirt. Her hair hung in tangled strands over her face, and when she looked up at me, her eyes, dark, hollow, and wet with tears, seemed to stare right through me. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracked and broken. "Help me find them." I couldn't move. My feet were frozen to the ground as the woman took a step toward me. Her presence was cold, so cold that the air around her seemed to freeze. Max barked, snapping me out of my paralysis. I backed up, my heart hammering in my chest. "You're not real. You can't be real." But she was, and she wasn't leaving. "Please," she begged, reaching out a skeletal hand. "My children." I could feel the temperature drop even further as she drew closer. The journal. I thought of the journal I had found by the creek, the story of her lost family, her desperation. She was still searching for them, even in death. And if I didn't do something, she would never stop. I grabbed the journal from the RV and ran toward the creek. The crying woman followed me, her wails growing louder, more desperate. My breath came in ragged gasps as I reached the water's edge, holding the journal in my shaking hands. "Your family's gone," I said, my voice trembling. "They're gone. You need to rest." She stopped, standing at the edge of the creek, her dark eyes fixed on the journal I placed on the ground by the water, as if offering her some kind of closure. For a moment the weeping faded and the wind died down. The crying woman stared at the journal, then at me. Her eyes softened, just for a second, and then she was gone. I left Dead Man's Creek the next morning, the journal still lying by the water where I'd placed it. As I drove away, the forest seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the oppressive weight lifting from the air. Max sat beside me, his head resting on my lap, finally calm. I'll never forget the sound of the weeping or the hollow eyes of the crying woman. She's still out there somewhere, searching for something she'll never find, and I'll never return to those woods. Not again. I was already on edge when I heard the rustling in the bushes. Being a park ranger in the middle of Sequoia National Park is no walk in the park, no pun intended. My name's Colin Frank, and I've been patrolling these woods for nearly a decade. Usually it's the occasional bear or reckless camper that gives me trouble, but today was different. The day started like any other. I had my usual morning coffee in the ranger station, chatting with my colleague, Tom Lear. He's a good guy, a bit younger than me, and still has that spark of excitement about the job. We joked about the old legends of the park, the ones about mysterious creatures lurking in the shadows. It was all in good fun until we got a call about a missing camper. "We've got a 10 to 54 over at the Kings Canyon area," Thomas said, referring to the code for a missing person. "You up for it, Colin?" I nodded, grabbing my gear. "Let's go find this lost soul." The camper, a guy named Walter Tisdale, was last seen hiking alone 2 days ago. His friends reported him missing when he didn't return to their campsite. They described him as an experienced hiker, which made his disappearance all the more concerning. We drove to the trailhead and started our search. The forest was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every snap and crunch underfoot. Hours passed, and there was no sign of Walter. We split up to cover more ground, agreeing to check in every 30 minutes. It was during one of these solitary stretches that I first heard it, a strange rhythmic rustling. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed the noise, my flashlight cutting through the dense foliage. Suddenly, the rustling stopped. The silence was deafening. I scanned the area, heart pounding, when something caught my eye. A figure, half hidden behind a tree. I approached cautiously, calling out, "Walter, is that you?" The figure didn't respond. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a makeshift scarecrow, crudely assembled from branches and old clothes. But it wasn't the scarecrow itself that made my blood run cold. It was the fact that it was wearing Walter's hiking gear. I backed away slowly, reaching for my radio. "Thomas, you there? I found something. Might be a clue." Static. Then Thomas's voice crackled through. "What is it, Colin?" "I think someone's messing with us. I found a scarecrow dressed in Walter's clothes. I'm at the north end of the Kings Canyon Trail." "Stay put. I'm coming to you," Thomas replied. While waiting for Thomas, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. Then, just as Thomas arrived, we heard a scream, a human scream. "Did you hear that?" Thomas asked, his face pale. I nodded, already moving toward the sound. We ran through the underbrush, the scream echoing again, louder this time. We burst into a small clearing and froze. In the center of the clearing was a cave entrance, and lying in front of it was Walter, or what was left of him. His body was mangled, torn apart by something with incredible strength. Thomas gagged, turning away while I forced myself to approach. "We need to call this in," I said, my voice shaking, "and we need to find out what did this." We radioed for backup and waited, weapons drawn, for what felt like an eternity. When reinforcements arrived, we explored the cave, hoping to find answers inside. The air was thick with the stench of decay. Bones, both animal and human, littered the ground. It was a slaughterhouse. And then we saw it. The creature was hunched over, gnawing on a bone. It looked up as we entered, its eyes reflecting the light from our flashlights. It was like nothing I'd ever seen, a grotesque amalgamation of features, part human, part beast. It let out a chilling screech and charged at us. We fired our weapons, the noise deafening in the confined space. The creature howled in pain, but it didn't stop. It lunged at Thomas, who dodged just in time. I aimed for its head, pulling the trigger repeatedly. Finally, it collapsed, a pool of dark blood spreading around it. We stood there panting as the reality of what had just happened sank in. "What the hell was that?" Thomas muttered, staring at the lifeless body. "I have no idea," I replied, "but we need to get out of here and report this back at the station." We were met with disbelief. The higher-ups were skeptical, to say the least. They sent a team to investigate the cave, but by the time they arrived, the creature's body was gone. Only the bones and the blood stains remained as evidence. The park was closed off and declared a restricted area. The official story was that a wild animal attack had claimed Walter's life, but Thomas and I knew the truth. Whatever that creature was, it wasn't just an animal, and it wasn't alone. The following weeks were a blur of debriefings and reports. Thomas and I were given time off, though it didn't feel like much of a break. I spent most of my days holed up in my apartment, trying to make sense of what happened. Every night, I replayed the events in my mind, wondering if there was something we missed. Then, one evening, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find a woman standing there, her face drawn and pale. "Are you Colin Frank?" she asked. "Yes. Can I help you?" "My name is Dr. Emily Cord. I'm a cryptozoologist. I heard about what happened in the park, and I think I know what you encountered." I invited her in, and she explained her theory. According to her research, the creature we saw matched descriptions of a legend known as the Shadow Beast. It was said to be an ancient predator, predating humans and surviving by hiding in the deepest, darkest parts of the forest. "They're incredibly rare," Dr. Cord said, "but they do exist, and they're very dangerous." I listened, trying to wrap my head around the idea. "So what do we do about it?" "We need to find its lair and destroy it," she replied. "If there's one, there could be more." Thomas and I agreed to help. Armed with new equipment provided by Dr. Cord, we returned to the park. This time we were prepared. We moved cautiously through the forest, using thermal cameras and motion sensors to track any signs of movement. Hours passed with no activity, and I started to think we were on a wild goose chase. But then the sensors picked up something, a large heat signature moving towards us. We readied our weapons, hearts pounding. The creature emerged from the trees, but it wasn't alone. Two more followed, their eyes glowing in the darkness. We opened fire, the sound of gunshots echoing through the forest. One of the creatures fell, but the others kept coming. Dr. Cord threw a flashbang, temporarily blinding them. We used the distraction to retreat to higher ground. From our vantage point, we could see the creatures circling below, searching for us. "We need to take them out before they find us," Thomas said, his voice steady. We coordinated our attack, using the thermal cameras to pinpoint their locations. One by one, we took them down until only silence remained. When it was over, we cautiously approached the bodies. Dr. Cord took samples, documenting everything for her research. "This should be enough to prove their existence," she said, sealing the samples in a container. "But we need to make sure there aren't any more." We spent the next few days combing the area, but there were no further signs of the creatures. It seemed we had eradicated the immediate threat. The park remained closed with plans for a more thorough investigation. As we prepared to leave, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface. There were still so many unanswered questions. What were these creatures really? Where did they come from? And were there more out there, waiting? Thomas patted my shoulder. "We did good, Colin. We saved lives." "Yeah," I replied, watching the forest fade into the distance. "But this place will never be the same." In the weeks that followed, Dr. Cord published her findings, and the story gained traction in scientific circles. The park remained under surveillance, and new safety protocols were put in place. As for me, I returned to my duties, keeping a vigilant eye on the woods. Life went on, but the memory of that day lingered, and though I never spoke of it, I knew deep down that the forest still held secrets waiting to be uncovered. My name is Cruz Janis, and I'm 25 years old. This happened last October when I decided to camp alone at Smoke Hollow, a remote site near the Greenbrier River in West Virginia. I thought it would be a quiet, picturesque trip, a chance to photograph the eerie beauty of an old settlement long forgotten by time. Instead, I barely made it out alive. The idea came to me while scrolling through an article about abandoned places. Smoke Hollow was once a bustling logging village in the late 1800s, but in the early 1900s, its population vanished under mysterious circumstances. All that remained were the ruins of a few homes and a cemetery, overgrown with moss and wild ivy. Local legends spoke of ghostly wails echoing through the hollow at night, but I figured those were just stories meant to scare off tourists. I was drawn to the place because it sounded like the perfect subject for my blog, Forgotten Trails. After my divorce, exploring remote and spooky locations became my therapy. Documenting these places filled the empty hours, gave me purpose. I wasn't afraid of being alone. I welcomed it. At least, that's what I told myself. The road to Smoke Hollow was narrow and winding, with ancient trees towering on either side. By the time I arrived at the campground, the late afternoon sun was hidden behind thick gray clouds. The place was deserted except for a lone park ranger at the check-in station. "First time here?" she asked, smiling. Her name tag read Maya Andrews. "Yeah, heard about it online," I said. Maya nodded. "Beautiful spot, but it can be disorienting. Fog rolls in heavy, and the echoes in the hollow can mess with your sense of direction. Stay on marked paths, and you'll be fine." Her words didn't bother me. I'd camped alone before. I smiled, thanked her, and drove to my site near the river. The air was damp and cold, carrying the faint, earthy smell of decaying leaves. I parked my RV, set up my gear, and took a short hike to the cemetery before nightfall. The graveyard was small, maybe 20 headstones, most of them cracked or leaning. One in particular caught my eye, a child's grave marked Lillian Reed, 1898-1905. A small lamb was carved into the stone, worn smooth by time. I snapped a few photos, the sky darkening faster than I expected, and headed back to camp. That night, the fog came in thick and fast, pressing against the RV windows like a living thing. I was reviewing my photos when I heard it, a faint, high-pitched wail cutting through the silence. It sounded like a child crying. I froze, my heart thudding. It couldn't be an animal. It was too human. I turned off the lights and peered outside. The fog distorted everything, but I saw no movement. I told myself it was just the wind and tried to go back to editing. But the cry came again. This time, closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, shivering in the cold. "Hello?" I called, my voice swallowed by the mist. "Is someone there?" Nothing. Just the river gurgling faintly in the distance. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. When I went back inside, I locked the door and pulled the blinds shut. It was a long time before I fell asleep. The next morning, I found wet handprints on my RV windows, small ones, like a child's. My stomach churned. The fog had cleared, leaving the woods damp and muddy, but there were no tracks around the RV, no signs that anyone had been there. Shaking off the unease, I decided to head back to the cemetery. It was brighter in the daylight, though the thick canopy still gave the place a shadowy quality. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before, a journal, lying partially buried beneath a toppled tombstone. Curiosity got the better of me. I brushed off the dirt and opened it. The faded handwriting belonged to someone named Eleanor Reed, likely the mother of the child whose grave I'd seen. The entries were ordinary at first, mentioning chores and weather, but near the end, they took a darker turn. One passage stuck with me. "Lillian hears them at night. The crying children. I thought she was dreaming, but now I hear them too. We must leave, but the forest won't let us go." My hands trembled as I closed the journal. It was just an old story, I told myself, a grieving mother's imagination. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong with this place. That night, the crying returned, louder, more insistent. I stayed inside, clutching my flashlight. The sound circled the RV, as if whoever, or whatever, it was wanted me to follow. I fought the urge to look. Then the generator failed, plunging me into complete darkness. I scrambled for my backup lantern, fumbling with the switch. When it flickered to life, I saw them, small, wet footprints, leading from the door to the far corner of the RV. My breath caught. The crying had stopped, replaced by faint, rapid tapping on the windows. "Go away," I whispered, backing into a corner. The tapping grew louder, frantic, then silence. And somehow that was worse. I felt trapped, as though the darkness itself was closing in, suffocating me. I didn't sleep at all. By morning, I was exhausted and desperate to leave. But when I stepped outside, my heart sank. Deep scratches raked across the RV's exterior. The tires were slashed, rubber shredded like paper. I was stranded. I decided to hike back to the cemetery, hoping to find a clue in Eleanor's journal, or at least distract myself. But the path felt different this time, unfamiliar. The trees seemed to shift around me, their branches reaching like skeletal hands. I stumbled into the clearing, and my blood ran cold. A figure stood by Lillian's grave. At first, I thought it was a child, but something about its proportions was wrong. Its arms were too long, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. It turned toward me, and I saw its face, hollow eyes, a wide, dripping grin. Water pooled around its feet, soaking the earth. I couldn't move. It opened its mouth, emitting a guttural, inhuman wail that echoed through the trees. My legs finally obeyed. I ran. The sound chased me all the way back to the RV. That night, the entity attacked. It battered the RV, its cries deafening. The windows rattled, the walls creaked. I remembered the journal's warning. The forest won't let us go. But it wasn't the forest. It was this thing, this embodiment of grief and rage. Desperate, I turned on my phone and played a voice recording I'd taken of Maya's advice. Stay near the marked paths. Her calm, human voice cut through the chaos like a beacon. The entity recoiled, its form flickering. I grabbed the journal, clutching it like a talisman, and shouted, "Lillian, stop! You're free!" The wailing stopped. The air grew still. For a moment I thought it was over, until I heard a soft, wet laugh behind me. I ran. I didn't stop until I reached the main road, the RV abandoned behind me. A passing car picked me up, and I barely managed to explain what had happened. When we passed Smoke Hollow, I saw it, the figure, standing in the fog. Its hollow eyes followed me. I never went back. The photos I took were strange, blurry, distorted, as though the camera couldn't quite capture the truth. But one image haunts me most, a figure standing by Lillian's grave, its face staring straight into the lens. And I've stopped camping alone. Some silences are meant to stay undisturbed. I wasn't afraid of being alone. In fact, I thrived on it. After years of pushing myself filming solo wilderness expeditions and gaining thousands of subscribers, isolation felt like a familiar friend. Devil's Ridge, though. This place was something else. I had scouted it out for weeks, planning my trip down to the smallest detail. The ridge was perfect, remote, rugged, untouched. Hardly any hikers came this far into the Montana wilderness, and the few who did warned of getting lost in the dense forests or disappearing into one of the old crumbling mining tunnels. The place was steeped in eerie local lore, and I loved it. Stories of shadowy figures, night stalkers, they called them, spirits of miners who perished in a cave-in over 100 years ago. They supposedly wandered these woods, haunting anyone foolish enough to linger too long. It was exactly the kind of place I could milk for my survival blog. Spooky, remote, and dripping with atmosphere. My audience would eat it up. I parked the RV in a small clearing nestled against a cliffside, setting up camp as the sun dipped below the horizon. The towering pines cast long shadows across the forest floor, and the sound of the wind through the trees was strangely muted. There was no bird song, no rustling of small animals, just the breeze and the soft creak of old branches swaying. Max, my drone, hovered above the trees, capturing the stunning panoramic views. I had just set it to autopilot to get some shots of the surrounding cliffs when the feed cut out, static flooding my screen. "What the hell?" I muttered, tapping the screen in frustration. I brought the drone back, its footage corrupted with strange, distorted images. warped figures flickering in and out of focus, standing just at the edge of the tree line. I chalked it up to a malfunction. After all, I was miles from civilization, and the signal could have been weak. But still, a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that the footage was wrong. Shrugging it off, I stored Max for the night and started a fire, settling in for what I hoped would be an uneventful evening. As I recorded my thoughts for the day, I decided to throw in a few words about the local legend, something to spice up the narrative for my viewers. They call them the Night Stalkers, I said into the camera, my face illuminated by the glow of the flames. Spirits of miners who died in these hills, lost to the darkness. But I'm not worried. Just a bunch of ghost stories, right? I grinned, more to convince myself than anyone else. The first real sign of trouble came the second night. I was reviewing the footage I had shot earlier in the day when I heard a soft sound outside the RV. At first, I thought it was the wind, just the trees shifting. But then it came again, low and rhythmic, like tapping. Max growled low in his corner, his eyes fixed on the door. I froze, listening. The tapping grew louder, almost insistent, like someone or something was circling the RV, knocking softly against the metal. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I grabbed my flashlight, flicking it on and swinging the beam toward the door. "All right, whoever's out there, you're not scaring me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Silence. I stood there holding my breath, waiting for something, anything to happen. After a few long moments, I convinced myself it was just a branch or something scraping against the side of the RV. I'd been on enough solo trips to know how easy it was to get jumpy out here. But Max was still growling, his ears flat against his head. He wasn't convinced, neither was I, if I'm honest. The next day, I decided to do a bit more exploring. The cliffs were full of old mining tunnels, most of them sealed up decades ago. I found one near the base of the ridge, its entrance boarded up with rotten planks. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pried a few loose, slipping through the narrow gap. The tunnel was dark and smelled like damp earth. My flashlight flickered as I moved deeper inside, casting eerie shadows against the jagged walls. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, crudely drawn, unfamiliar shapes that seemed to spiral in on themselves. I felt a sudden chill, and a soft sound echoed through the tunnel, like footsteps on loose gravel. I froze, shining my light down the passage. Nothing. Still, something about the place felt wrong. I backed out quickly, breathing a sigh of relief as I stepped back into the daylight. As I walked away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night, the tapping returned. This time it was louder, more deliberate. I sat in the RV, clutching the flashlight in one hand, the other gripping my camera as I recorded the strange noises. The tapping moved around the RV, slow and methodical, almost as if it was circling me. I stood up, heart pounding, and yanked the door open, shining the light into the darkness. Nothing. I stepped outside, my breath fogging in the cold air. The forest was still, but the air felt thick, heavy. I turned slowly, scanning the tree line, and that's when I saw them, shadows tall and thin, flitting between the trees. They moved like people, but their forms were indistinct, more like silhouettes than solid shapes. My chest tightened. I swung the flashlight toward the figures, but as soon as the beam touched them, they vanished, swallowed by the darkness. I stood there frozen, my heart hammering in my chest. The wind had picked up, carrying faint whispers, almost like voices calling from the woods. I backed toward the RV, slamming the door shut behind me. The shadows grew bolder after that. No matter where I went, I could feel them watching me, their dark forms flickering just at the edge of my vision. My drone footage showed brief, eerie glimpses of them. Dark, human-like shapes moving through the trees, always just out of focus. I tried to leave the ridge, packed up my gear, loaded Max into the RV, and started the engine. But the moment I hit the ignition, the RV stalled. I tried again and again. Nothing. It was as if the ridge itself didn't want me to leave. Panic set in. I wasn't one to lose my cool, but this was something I couldn't explain. I was trapped and I wasn't alone. On the final night, everything came to a head. I was lying in bed, the RV windows covered, trying to block out the tapping that had returned. Max was huddled in the corner, trembling. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like something was trying to get in. I sat up, heart racing, and suddenly the RV shook violently, as if something had slammed into the side. I jumped to my feet, grabbing the flashlight, but the beam flickered and died. The whispers outside grew louder, more urgent, filling my head with a cacophony of unintelligible voices. I rushed to the door, flinging it open, only to be met with complete darkness. The fire outside had gone out. The shadows were everywhere now, circling the RV, their forms more defined than ever. Dark, human-like figures with no faces, no features, just endless blackness. They weren't just watching me anymore. They were coming for me. I ran, flashlight flickering back to life as I sprinted into the woods. The shadows followed, flitting between the trees, their whispers filling my ears, growing louder and louder. I didn't know where I was going, just away from the tapping, the whispers, the shadows. But the forest twisted around me, disorienting me, and soon I was lost in a sea of towering pines and jagged rocks. And then I saw it, the entrance to the old mining tunnel, standing open like a gaping mouth. The shadows pressed in closer, their forms flickering at the edges of my vision. And I realized with a sinking feeling that I had nowhere else to go. I stumbled toward the tunnel, the air inside cold and stale. The shadows followed me in, their whispers echoing off the walls. I don't know what I expected to find in there. An escape, maybe, a way out. But as I ventured deeper into the darkness, I realized the truth. There was no escape. The Night Stalkers weren't just spirits. They were part of this place, tied to the land, the tunnels, the shadows. And now, so was I. The last thing I remember before the darkness swallowed me whole was the sound of tapping, so soft, rhythmic, and endless. Days later, when Ranger Hank found my RV, it was empty. My gear was scattered, my camera still rolling, but I was gone. The footage showed brief glimpses of my final moments, me running into the forest, the shadows close behind, their forms flickering and twisting in the dark. The last frame caught my face, pale and terrified, standing at the entrance of the tunnel. A silhouette stood behind me, tall, thin, and featureless. The Night Stalkers had found me, and I was never leaving Devil's Ridge. My name is Dax Smith. I'm 21 years old, and for most of my life, I thought I was tough enough to face anything. As a firefighter, I'd run into burning buildings without hesitation, confident I could control the chaos. That was before the accident, before a collapsing beam trapped me, forcing me to watch a child die in the flames. I walked away physically unscathed, but the guilt stayed with me. Now I live off-grid in my RV, drifting from one remote spot to another. That's trying to outrun memories that won't let me sleep. That's how I ended up at Seneca Rocks in West Virginia, chasing a rumor about a place called Devil's Hollow. A bartender at a rundown pub had mentioned it after a few beers, describing it as the kind of place that eats your soul. It sounded melodramatic, but the idea hooked me. Maybe the isolation would help. Maybe confronting something darker than my own mind would finally give me peace. I drove into the woods early on a foggy morning, the narrow road twisting like a serpent through dense trees. My RV bounced over potholes, the forest pressing closer with every mile. The air was heavy, damp with the scent of moss and decaying leaves. It felt like the kind of place the world forgot. Eventually, the road dead-ended in a clearing. I parked, stepped outside, and stretched, scanning the area. A rough trail led deeper into the woods, marked by a weathered sign that read, "Devil's Hollow. Keep out." Perfect. The kind of ominous warning I'd come to expect from overblown local legends. I grabbed my backpack, packed with a flashlight, a knife, and some snacks, and set off down the trail. The forest grew denser with every step. The trees gnarled and twisted as if trying to block my way. The wind didn't reach this far in. It was silent, except for the crunch of my boots on the leaf-strewn path. By mid-afternoon, I reached an old campsite, a fire pit long cold, sat surrounded by rusted cans and scraps of cloth. A torn hiking boot lay in the dirt, its laces frayed. Nearby, I found a tattered map folded against a rock. I picked it up. Furiously scrawled in the margin were 3 words, "Don't follow them." I frowned, glancing around. "Follow who?" I muttered, shoving the map into my pocket. I moved on, trying to shake the unease crawling up my spine. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees leaned closer, their bark cracked and blackened. Strange carvings appeared, faces twisted in agony, their mouths open as if screaming. By the time I set up camp, the sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the woods shrouded in twilight. I built a small fire and sat beside it, staring into the flames. That's when I heard it, the faint sound of crying, a woman's voice, soft and broken, coming from the trees. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife at my belt. "Hello?" I called, my voice rough in the still air. The crying stopped. I stood, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating nothing but endless trees. "Anyone out there?" I called again, louder this time. Nothing. Just the crackle of the fire and my own breathing. I told myself it was probably an animal, some nocturnal bird or a trick of the wind. Still, I kept the knife close as I lay down for the night. I woke sometime after midnight to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow. Deliberate. My pulse quickened as I grabbed my flashlight and knife, crawling out of the tent as quietly as I could. The fire had burned low, casting weak, flickering light over the campsite. That's when I saw her. A young woman stood at the edge of the clearing, barefoot and dirty, her long hair tangled with leaves. She looked at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't go deeper." "Who are you?" I asked, my throat dry. "What are you doing out here?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and disappeared into the trees, her figure swallowed by the darkness. I hesitated, every instinct telling me not to follow, but something about her felt off, like she didn't belong here any more than I did. The next morning, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Against my better judgment, I packed up camp and followed her trail. The carvings on the trees grew more frequent and grotesque, the air heavier with each step. I felt like I was walking into a trap, but I couldn't turn back. Not yet. That's when I found it, a natural rock arch rising out of the forest floor, its surface covered in ancient-looking symbols. Beneath it lay a shallow pit filled with ash and bones, human bones. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The ground felt wrong here, the air thick with something I couldn't name. As I stood there, the shadows seemed to shift, coalescing into a figure. It was massive, its body cloaked in darkness, its eyes burning red. The apparition didn't move, but I could feel its gaze, heavy and searing, as if it were peeling back my skin to look inside me. "You don't belong here," it said, its voice deep and rumbling like distant thunder. I ran. The forest closed in around me, the trees twisting into impossible shapes. The path I'd followed was gone, replaced by jagged rocks and thick underbrush. The creature's voice followed me, low and mocking, whispering my failures, my guilt, my pain. "You let her die," it hissed, the words striking like a whip. "You watched her burn." I tripped, falling hard onto the ground. When I looked up, the woman was there again, different now. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her eyes hollow. "Help me," she begged, reaching out a hand. I hesitated. The creature's voice filled my head again. "You can't save her. You couldn't save anyone." I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to stand. "You're not real," I said, my voice shaking. "You're just in my head." The apparition laughed, a terrible sound that echoed through the hollow. "Everything here is real, Dax, including your sins." I turned and ran again, ignoring the whispers, the shadows, the faces that seemed to form in the trees. When I finally stumbled back to my RV, I was bleeding and covered in scratches, but alive. The air felt lighter as I slammed the door shut and locked it. I drove out of those woods without looking back. Whatever had been in the hollow, ghost, demon, or something worse, it hadn't killed me, but it had left its mark. I still hear its voice sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, reminding me of what I've lost. I'll never go back to Devil's Hollow. And if you're smart, neither will you. My name's Declan Hunter, and this happened to me in 2023 at Lassen Volcanic National Park in California. I was just taking some time to myself after my divorce, figuring some fresh air and a quiet place might clear my head. Even though an RV trip wasn't exactly my go-to, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I pulled up near a trailhead by Lake Helen, a remote spot with only the sound of boiling mud pits and the occasional hiss from a feral animal somewhere off in the distance. I was all set to spend a quiet night out here, far from anyone I knew and with no cell service to pester me about work. Little did I know, some alone time would be the last thing I needed. The first hint of trouble started around dusk. I was setting up a little campfire, planning to roast a few marshmallows and call it an early night. That's when I saw him, just a figure on the opposite side of the lake, about 200 yards out, staring straight in my direction. He was a guy in worn-out denim overalls, no shirt, and a hat that looked like it had been through more than one rainstorm. Nothing too strange at first, just a camper a little farther off. But he didn't move for a good 10 minutes. He stood there, hands hanging at his sides, and just watched. I yelled out, "Hello!" Friendly enough, right? No response. Not a wave, not a nod, not even a turn of his head. He just kept staring, frozen, like he was posing for a creepy statue commission. Feeling a chill, not from the cold, but something else, I picked up my marshmallow stick and muttered to myself about minding my own business. Darkness fell and the figure faded into the night. I convinced myself he was probably just another camper or a lost hiker who thought better of bothering someone in an RV. Maybe he went back to wherever he'd set up his tent. Maybe he didn't. And maybe I didn't want to know. I woke up around midnight to a sound, something tapping against the side of my RV. Tap, 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 nop. Loud but persistent. My heart went from 0 to 100 real quick. I grabbed the flashlight, climbed down from the bed, and tiptoed to the door. My first thought, a raccoon, or maybe a tree branch scraping the side in the wind, but I'd parked clear of any trees. "Who's there?" I called out, almost hoping for no answer. Silence. The tapping stopped, leaving an even eerier stillness. I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but I kept the flashlight on, just in case. I managed to fall back asleep, more out of exhaustion than comfort, until I heard footsteps circling the RV. Around 3 a.m., slow, deliberate footsteps crunching against the gravel, like whoever it was knew exactly how to keep me on edge. I held my breath, lying there in the dark, pretending I couldn't hear anything, hoping the person or thing would go away. The footsteps stopped, right outside my window, and then I heard breathing, heavy, wet, and wheezy, as if this person had just run a marathon. I couldn't help it. I glanced through the blinds, careful not to make a sound. What I saw still makes my skin crawl. It was the man in the overalls, staring at the window, as if he knew exactly where I was hiding. His face was too close to the glass, his expression unreadable, like he was lost in thought, or just waiting. I stayed as still as I could, trying to be invisible. My mind raced through options: drive off, shout for help, or sit in silence and pray he'd leave. Then he turned abruptly and began circling the RV again. I heard the crunch of his boots moving around, getting closer to the door. At this point, I felt I had no choice. I grabbed my keys, jumped into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The headlights flashed on, and in that brief moment, I saw him, standing directly in front of the RV, blocking my path. He had this expression, a mix of anger and amusement, like he was daring me to do something stupid. "Move!" I shouted, leaning on the horn. He just grinned. His teeth caught the light in a way that was too chilling to be accidental. Then he held up something. A battered old hunting knife. I didn't need a clearer signal. I slammed on the gas, praying he'd step aside. He did, at the very last second, stumbling backward with a scowl. I didn't look back. I kept going, my heart pounding like it would beat out of my chest. I got out of there, drove to the nearest ranger station, and explained what had happened. The ranger, a calm, seasoned-looking guy, didn't look as surprised as I had hoped. He told me a story about an old hermit named Clyde, a local who had supposedly disappeared a few years ago after some kind of family tragedy. Rumor had it, he was living rough in the wilderness, rarely bothering campers, but enough to make people nervous when he did. Clyde, I muttered, running the name through my mind. It fit. There was something off, something crazed about the way he looked at me, as if he was caught between different worlds. After making sure I was all right, the ranger said he'd look into it, but his calm demeanor didn't settle my nerves. He seemed more resigned than anything, like he'd dealt with Clyde's disturbances before and didn't expect anything to change, as if Clyde had become part of the scenery, just as much as the boiling mud pits and sulfurous springs. Days later, back home, I couldn't shake what happened. A few online searches turned up stories, unconfirmed but chilling enough, of campers who'd gone missing, only to have their bodies found weeks later in the woods, each with strange markings cut into their arms. None of these stories made it to the news, too far-fetched or maybe just too unsettling for anyone to confirm. I found a police sketch. It looked almost exactly like Clyde, described as the loner, someone who knew the land better than anyone else. He had become something of a legend among the locals, a cautionary tale for campers venturing too far from the beaten path. That's when I read a line that brought everything crashing down on me. Some say he carves those who stray into his territory, leaving a mark only those who dare to cross him ever see. For all the comfort I took in the fact that I'd survived the night, I could still feel Clyde's eyes on me, that grin etched in my memory, the glint of the knife, and the sense that I'd gotten too close to something best left alone. The forest had never felt so thick, so claustrophobic. I had been on the road for weeks, traveling up and down the East Coast in my RV, looking for some peace. It was supposed to be a reset, a break from the grind after getting laid off from my tech job. I thought getting away from everything would give me a fresh perspective, but the road had only left me more exhausted. It was like I couldn't find what I was searching for, and I didn't even know what that was anymore. That's how I ended up in Ocala National Forest. It was early fall, and the place was practically deserted. The few tourists had already left, leaving the humid air and endless stretches of swamp and pine all to me. The ranger I passed when I pulled into the park didn't seem to think camping so close to Devil's Eye Spring was a good idea. "There's no one else out there this time of year," he said, leaning into my open window with a cautious smile. "People get lost in that part of the forest, especially near the spring. Strange place. People say it's cursed." Cursed? I didn't believe in any of that. I was here for quiet, not ghost stories. Still, his words stuck with me as I wound down the narrow trail in my RV, finally parking next to the spring. The water was still and black, perfectly round, like the eye of some sleeping giant, with tall cypress trees surrounding it like ancient sentinels. The spot was isolated, just as I wanted. After setting up camp, I sat by the water and tried to take it all in. The only sound was the occasional splash of something in the water. Fish, maybe, or a frog. The heat was oppressive, the kind of sticky warmth that clings to you and makes every movement sluggish. I hadn't realized how worn down I was from weeks of driving, but the moment I sat down, the weight of exhaustion hit me like a brick. It was a heavy kind of tired, the kind that seeps into your bones and makes you want to sleep for days. So that's what I did. I crawled into the RV, lay down on the thin mattress, and passed out. I woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. The RV was stifling, even with the windows cracked, and my head pounded like I'd been hit with a hammer. I sat up, rubbing my temples, trying to shake off the heaviness in my chest. That's when I noticed something strange. The forest outside was completely silent, not even the usual night sounds of crickets or frogs. It was as if the entire world was holding its breath. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just the thick humidity dampening the sound. But then, in the stillness, I heard it. A soft whisper, faint and distant. It was impossible to make out the words, but I knew it was there. My pulse quickened. Who else would be out here in the middle of nowhere? I grabbed a flashlight, threw on my boots, and stepped outside. The air was still, and the beam of my light barely cut through the haze hanging over the spring. Nothing. I circled the RV once, shining the light over the trees, half expecting to catch someone watching me from the darkness. But there was no one. Only the trees looming like shadowy figures in the mist. The whisper came again, this time closer. My skin prickled, and I pointed the flashlight in the direction of the sound. As the beam caught the nearest tree, I froze. There, carved into the bark, was an intricate spiral. It was faint, but I could see the markings etched deep into the wood, swirling inward like some ancient symbol. I hadn't noticed it when I arrived, but now it was unmistakable. "What the hell?" I muttered, running my fingers over the grooves. The texture was rough, jagged, fresh. Whoever had carved it had done it recently. But why? A chill crept down my spine, the kind that sticks with you even in the thick Florida heat. I backed away from the tree and went inside the RV, locking the door behind me. The next morning, I tried to shake it off. Maybe it was a prank or some kind of tribal marking that had been there for years, but something still gnawed at the back of my mind. The whisper I'd heard wasn't a figment of my imagination. I was sure of it. When I stepped outside again, my eyes went straight to the tree. The spiral was still there, mocking me with its perfect precision. I walked a few paces around the campsite, scanning the other trees. That's when I saw it, more spirals, dozens of them, carved into trees, rocks, even the dirt near the edge of the spring. It was like they had multiplied overnight. I knelt by one of the carvings in the ground, my fingers trembling as I traced the lines. They were everywhere. My pulse quickened as I stood up, stepping back. I hadn't imagined them. They were real, and there were too many to ignore. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the ranger had mentioned something about Native American tribes that once lived in the area. These carvings could be remnants of some ancient ritual or custom. But the more I looked at them, the more unsettled I became. I grabbed my phone, hoping to research the symbols, but when I turned it on, the screen flickered and died. I checked the time on my watch. It blinked nonsensically, stuck on 12 no matter how many times I reset it. It wouldn't budge. Time was frozen, just like the forest around me. The air felt heavier as the hours passed, like something was pressing down on me. The whisper returned, no longer distant, but close. Too close. It followed me wherever I went, slipping in and out of the thick, humid air, just out of reach. I could feel it in my bones. Something was watching me. That night, the dream started. I was lying in the RV, the air thick and suffocating, when I felt it, a presence standing over me, its breath hot against my skin. I tried to move, but I was paralyzed. My limbs refused to cooperate. I could feel its eyes on me, burning into my skull. Then came the whisper, low and guttural, words in a language I couldn't understand, but the intent was clear. I was marked. I woke up gasping, my heart pounding, the sheets soaked in sweat. The RV was stifling again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. My eyes darted to the window, half expecting to see something staring back at me. The markings were spreading. They weren't just outside anymore. They were inside the RV, on the walls, on the floor, even on my skin. I tore off my shirt, running to the small mirror by the sink. There on my chest was a spiral, faint but unmistakable. My hands trembled as I traced the lines etched into my flesh. My mind raced. The curse, the ranger's warning, it was all real. The whispers were louder now, relentless. They filled my head, demanding my attention. I stumbled out of the RV, gasping for air, trying to escape the suffocation and presence that had followed me. But no matter how far I ran, the whispers followed. I found myself standing at the edge of Devil's Eye Spring, my chest heaving. The whispers swirled around me. The markings on the trees seemed to glow in the moonlight, pulling me toward the water. My reflection in the still surface was distorted, twisted, as if the thing inside me was staring back. I knew what I had to do. I grabbed a rock, sharp enough to cut, and slashed across the markings on my chest, trying to break the curse. Blood dripped into the water, staining the surface, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent, as if the forest itself was angry. I fell to my knees, clutching my chest, feeling the burn of the cut mixing with the spiral. I could hear them now. The marked ones, the spirits of those who had come before me, trapped in the same cycle, marked by the same curse. They were waiting for me to join them. I don't remember how I got back to the RV. The next thing I knew, I was driving, the road stretching out in front of me, the forest blurring into the distance. The whispers were gone, but the sense of dread remained, a heavy weight in my chest. I thought I had escaped. I thought the ritual had worked. But when I glanced down at the dashboard, my blood ran cold. There, carved into the plastic, was a small, intricate spiral. I was still marked, and I knew the forest wasn't done with me yet. My name is Edison Russell, and I'm telling you about something that happened to me back in 2006, up near the remote stretches of the Boundary Waters in Minnesota. I'm an Ojibwe, which means I know these woods and waters like the back of my hand. But even with all that, I'm not so sure what I saw out there. I'd been working upstate for a few years, guiding out-of-towners through the lakes and keeping them out of trouble. Most of these folks think that roughing it is skipping a lot, so I'm usually babysitting more than anything. Not that I mind. Easy enough work when the pay is good, but what happened on this trip was anything but easy. This particular group, the Lavins, was a married couple from Chicago, all fresh-faced and eager with their matching waterproof jackets and GPS gadgets. They didn't bring a tent, figuring it would be nice to sleep under the stars, which told me everything I needed to know. I insisted on grabbing an extra tarp from the truck before we set off. I didn't want to be out there longer than a couple of days, and I sure didn't want to end up bailing them out of some weather. The Lavins were fascinated by the wilderness, though, in that way that city folks are, asking what every rustle was, poking at animal tracks like they'd find gold under the mud, snapping photos of moss. By evening, they were tuckered out, and we set up camp by a lake surrounded by towering pines and thick tangled brush. It was as quiet as ever out there, the water perfectly still mirroring the trees in a way that always kind of got to me. We cooked up some dinner, and after the obligatory marshmallows, I headed for my own sleeping bag, only a few feet from theirs. Around midnight, I woke up. It wasn't anything obvious. Not a noise or movement that I could say for sure, but my skin felt prickly, and my pulse was already up. The Lavins were out cold, not even a stir from their side of the tarp. I sat up slowly, straining to hear, but the forest was silent. It was the kind of quiet that felt wrong, like a giant had swallowed the night whole and left us hanging in some frozen snapshot of the woods. After a few minutes, I decided it was just me being jumpy. Maybe something I ate. I tried lying down, but as soon as I closed my eyes, I felt something off. There was a smell in the air, faint but enough to hit the back of my throat, like a mix of rot and copper. I'd been in these woods long enough to know what decaying wildlife smelled like, but this was different. It was heavy and bitter, not natural. I sat up, looking around again, but there was nothing. No shapes, no rustling, no sign of anything out of place. Then I noticed a faint scraping sound, a low dragging noise that seemed to come from the edge of the camp. I reached for my flashlight but held it tight without switching it on. It was instinct, maybe. I wasn't sure I wanted to see whatever was out there. The Lavins were still sleeping, blissfully unaware of anything strange. I tried to decide if I should wake them up, but I didn't want to spook them over something I couldn't even identify myself. I was starting to think it was just an animal nosing around when I saw something at the edge of the light. A shape, low to the ground, shifting between the trees like it was crawling. Its limbs moved awkwardly, bending in a way that made my stomach twist. I'd seen plenty of wolves and bears out here, even the odd mountain lion, but this didn't fit. The size was all wrong. It was huge, but it slinked like it had no bones, slipping forward in fits and jerks, covering ground in silence except for that scraping sound. I kept my flashlight pointed low, debating if I should shine it toward whatever this thing was. Just as I was about to turn it on, the thing stopped, crouched low as if it sensed me watching. For a second, it just sat there, its shape barely visible, a shadow against shadows. I held my breath, and then, as if on some unspoken signal, it started moving again, but toward the lavins. That's when I made my move, clicking on the flashlight and aiming it right at the shape. For a second, I caught a glimpse of it. A hunched figure, thick fur, matted, and dark, but its limbs were long, with these stretched out hands that didn't look right. They reminded me of raccoons, except scaled up and twisted, gnarled like tree roots. Its head whipped around to look at me, and that's when I felt the real fear settle in. I knew in that moment it wasn't anything I'd ever seen or heard about in these woods. The thing reared back, its body unfolding in a way that made it look even taller, bigger. It made this choking noise, something wet and ragged. And before I knew it, it lunged forward faster than I'd have thought possible. I yelled, and the lavins bolted up, looking around wildly, eyes huge in the beam of my flashlight. I told them to get up, to run, but they were frozen, their faces locked on that thing standing at the edge of our camp. It moved again, slinking back a few steps before it made a sound that I can only describe as laughter, if laughter was dragged through broken glass. The lavins finally started moving, grabbing at their things while I kept the light on the creature. It stayed right where it was, watching us like it knew it didn't have to rush. We backed away slowly, keeping our flashlights trained on it, inching back through the trees. I kept checking over my shoulder, my mind racing as I tried to figure out what this thing wanted. It didn't act like an animal. It was too patient, too deliberate. As soon as we got far enough from camp, I turned and pushed the lavins ahead, telling them to move as fast as they could. We stumbled through the dark, the trail barely visible, my heart pounding as I listened for any sign that it was following us. But it was too quiet. We kept moving, breaking into a run as soon as we thought we'd lost it. The lavins were gasping for breath, tripping over roots and rocks while I kept glancing back, half expecting to see it right on our heels. Somehow, we made it back to the truck, and I didn't waste a second starting it up, peeling out of there with the headlights slicing through the darkness. We drove for miles in silence, the lavins too shaken to speak and me too wired to try. By the time we reached the ranger station, dawn was breaking, and the whole thing felt like some fever dream. But when I looked down at the truck's hood, there was a smear of that coppery dark stuff, a reminder that whatever it was, it had been real. I dropped the lavins off, and they didn't say much, just a shaky thanks before they climbed into their car and took off back toward civilization. I couldn't blame them. That's what I should have done too. Just turned around and left. But instead, I spent the next few days digging into what I'd seen, asking around quietly, hoping maybe someone else had come across it before. I didn't find much, just whispers and fragments, stories that went back generations among the locals. They talked about something that lived in the deep woods, a creature that didn't belong to any known species. Some said it was a spirit. Others swore it was a protector of sorts, driving intruders away from certain parts of the forest. But what stuck with me was the name I kept hearing. One whispered with a kind of reverence, the Vishka. They said it was something old, older than any animal or spirit, something that didn't take kindly to people crossing its path. I don't know if that's what it was or if it's just a story locals tell to keep folks out of places they don't want us, but whatever it was, I knew one thing. It was real, and it was out there somewhere in those woods, biding its time. And if I had to guess, it was still lurking, waiting for the next poor soul to wander too close. I came to the Pine Barrens for peace, solitude. I thought that getting away from everything would help, that losing myself in the wilderness would somehow fix what was broken inside of me after my wife Sarah passed. Nothing made sense anymore. My work as a photographer felt pointless. The things I used to care about were gone. Grief had hollowed me out, leaving only a shell of the person I used to be. So, when the offer came to photograph the Barrens for a travel magazine, I didn't hesitate. I packed up my RV, grabbed my camera, and hit the road. The Pine Barrens had always intrigued me with their dense forests and twisted folklore, but I wasn't here for ghost stories. I was here to work, to focus on something other than my own loss, or at least that's what I told myself. It was the second night when I first saw them, the lights. I had spent the day photographing the eerie, quiet beauty of the Barrens, the way the pines stretched up toward the sky like skeletal fingers, the sandy trails winding through dense underbrush. By the time I returned to my RV, the sky was already dark, stars barely visible through the thick canopy above. It was the kind of stillness I had been craving, the perfect backdrop for my long exposure night shots. I set up my camera, aiming toward the trees, capturing the stillness of the forest beneath the stars. As I clicked through the shots, I noticed something strange in the frames, small glowing orbs in the distance. At first, I assumed they were fireflies or maybe even distant lanterns, but these lights were too bright, too concentrated. They hovered just beyond the tree line, flickering in and out of focus as if dancing in the air. I looked up from the camera, squinting into the dark. Nothing. The lights were gone. I frowned, checking the screen again. There they were, clear as day. Pale, round orbs glowing softly in the distance, just out of reach. I rubbed my eyes, telling myself it was a trick of the camera, some glitch or reflection I couldn't quite explain. The rational part of my mind dismissed it, but something else, a quiet nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach, told me something wasn't right. I didn't sleep well that night. Even inside the RV, with the doors locked and the curtains drawn, I couldn't shake the feeling that those lights were still out there, watching. The next morning, I pushed the strange encounter aside and decided to venture deeper into the forest. The Barrens were an endless maze of pine trees and narrow winding trails, and I wanted to capture the desolation, the beauty of the place. I slung my camera over my shoulder and set off, keeping an eye on my GPS to make sure I didn't get lost. The deeper I went, the more unsettling the forest became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches twisting like gnarled hands. The air was thick and heavy, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural. There were no birds, no rustling of leaves, just silence. I tried to ignore the growing sense of unease. I was here to work, not to get spooked by old legends. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My compass, which had been working fine all morning, suddenly started spinning erratically. The needle swung wildly in every direction. My phone lost signal, the GPS cutting out entirely. I stopped, staring down at the malfunctioning devices in my hands. I was good with directions, had spent years hiking and camping in places far more remote than this. But now, standing in the heart of the Barrens, I couldn't tell which way I'd come from, and the trees all looked the same. The wind picked up, carrying with it a faint whisper. It was so soft I wasn't sure I'd even heard it at first. Just the wind, I told myself, trying to shake off the creeping anxiety. I started to walk back toward the RV, retracing my steps as best I could. That's when I heard it again. Whispers, like distant voices carried on the breeze. Back at camp, I felt the full weight of isolation pressing down on me. The whispers from earlier hadn't stopped. If anything, they'd grown louder, clearer. As the day turned into night, I told myself it was nothing, that I was just on edge from being alone out here. But as darkness fell and the oppressive stillness of the forest closed in, I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. I decided to review the photos I'd taken that day, hoping the distraction would calm my nerves. As I scrolled through the images, something caught my eye. The lights. There they were again. Hovering just at the edge of the frame, bright and unmistakable. They flickered in the distance, glowing softly against the dark backdrop of the trees. I zoomed in, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. but the closer I looked, the more the lights seemed to blur, as if they were shifting, moving in some unnatural way. I glanced up from the screen and my heart stopped. The lights weren't just in the photos. They were outside. I rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain, and there, just beyond the trees, I saw them. Pale, glowing orbs floating silently in the darkness. They pulsed gently, like they were beckoning me, drawing me in. I felt a strange pull, an almost physical urge to step outside, to follow the lights into the woods. I told myself it was ridiculous, that I was being irrational, but the more I stared, the stronger the pull became. Before I knew it, I was grabbing my camera and heading for the door. The forest was darker than it should have been. The thick canopy blocked out any trace of moonlight. The lights moved ahead of me, hovering just out of reach, flickering in and out of sight as they led me deeper into the trees. I kept telling myself that I was only following them to figure out what they were, to get the perfect shot for my blog. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the whole truth. There was something else drawing me forward, something I couldn't explain. The deeper I went, the more disoriented I became. The trees seemed to close in around me, twisting and warping. Their shapes blurred in the darkness. My footsteps felt heavy, sluggish, like the ground was pulling at me, slowing me down. The lights, however, remained just out of reach, always moving a little farther ahead, urging me to follow. And then I heard it. Sarah's voice. "Nate." I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart hammering in my chest. "Nate, come back to me." It was her. It had to be. The voice was so soft, so familiar, like the way she used to call me from the other room when she needed help with something. I stood there, frozen, staring at the lights as they pulsed gently, the sound of her voice swirling around me. I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe she was out there, waiting for me, that somehow she wasn't gone. But something about the voice wasn't right. It was too distant, too hollow, like an echo from a place I couldn't reach. The lights flickered, growing brighter, and I felt the pull again, stronger this time, almost overwhelming. My mind screamed at me to move, to follow, to find her, but something deep in my gut told me not to. "No," I whispered, backing away, shaking my head. "This isn't real." I turned to run, but the forest had changed. The once familiar path was gone, replaced by an endless tangle of trees, all twisted and gnarled, like something out of a nightmare. The lights flared angrily, swirling around me. Now their once soft glow became harsh and blinding. I stumbled, panic rising in my chest as the ground beneath me seemed to shift, pulling me down. The air grew thick and suffocating. The whispers returned louder now, surrounding me, pressing in from all sides. "Give in. Come with us." I ran blindly through the trees, the lights chasing me, flickering like angry fireflies. The whispers grew louder, their voices overlapping, creating a cacophony of sound that made it impossible to think. I wasn't sure how long I ran. Time seemed to stretch and warp, just like the forest around me. But eventually I spotted a familiar shape in the distance. The RV. I burst through the trees, collapsing against the side of the RV, gasping for breath. The lights hovered at the edge of the clearing, pulsing angrily, but they didn't follow. I scrambled inside, slamming the door behind me. The lights remained outside, flickering ominously, but they didn't come closer. It was as if something was keeping them at bay, something stronger than whatever force had been pulling me toward them. I slumped to the floor, my body trembling with exhaustion, my mind still reeling from the experience. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of them lingered, echoing in the back of my mind. I had nearly followed them, nearly given in. But whatever those lights were, they weren't Sarah. They never had been. As dawn broke, I didn't wait around to see if the lights would return. I packed up the RV and left the pine barrens behind, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting for the next traveler to lose their way. The beckoning lights hadn't gotten me. Not this time. But I knew they wouldn't stop. My name's Cassius Gibson, and back in 2023, I decided to take my RV out to the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee for a much needed escape. After years of working as a paramedic in Nashville, I figured some solitude and nature might help clear my head. I wasn't looking for anything fancy, just me, my RV, and the open road. The drive was smooth, the kind that makes you appreciate cruise control and good coffee. I arrived at a quaint little campground nestled between dense forests and winding trails. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and earth. I parked my RV in a spot that offered a panoramic view of the mountains. As I set up camp, a couple of fellow campers waved hello. A middle-aged couple named Linda and Frank who were traveling cross-country. Friendly folks, but I was here for solitude. That evening, I sat by the campfire, poking at the embers while sipping on a cold beer. The stars overhead were a dazzling display, free from the city's light pollution. I thought about the countless nights I had spent rushing through city streets, sirens blaring, and here I was, enveloped in peace. Maybe I should have done this sooner, I mused aloud, chuckling at my own procrastination. The next morning, I decided to explore one of the lesser-known trails I'd heard about from a park ranger, a path that promised waterfalls and maybe even some wildlife sightings. As I geared up with my backpack and a trusty walking stick, Linda called out, "Heading out early, huh?" "Yeah, figured I'd beat the crowd," I replied. "Be careful out there," Frank added. "These trails can get tricky." I nodded and set off, the sound of gravel crunching under my boots. The trail was everything I'd hoped for, serene, shaded, and alive with the sounds of nature. Birds chirped overhead, and occasionally a squirrel would dart across the path. After about an hour, I reached a clearing with a small waterfall cascading into a crystal-clear pool. I sat on a rock, took off my boots, and dipped my feet into the icy water. It was rejuvenating. As I rested, I noticed carvings on a nearby tree. They weren't the usual John Loves Mary kind of engravings. These were symbols, circles intersecting with lines, surrounded by what looked like ancient runes. Must be some local art project, I thought. Still, they gave me an odd feeling, like when you hear a joke that doesn't quite land, but you laugh anyway out of politeness. Shrugging it off, I continued along the trail, deciding to make a loop back to the campground. About halfway back, the forest grew denser. The canopy above thickened, allowing only specks of sunlight to pierce through. The sounds of birds and rustling leaves faded, replaced by an eerie silence. I checked my watch, 2 p.m., plenty of daylight left, but the atmosphere felt off. I pressed on, but the path seemed less defined. After another 20 minutes, I realized I wasn't on the trail anymore. "Great job, Cassius," I muttered. "First time out, and you get lost." I pulled out my map and compass, trying to orient myself. As I stood there, I heard a rustling behind me. "Hello?" I called out, hoping it was another hiker. No response. Probably just an animal. I decided to keep moving in what I believed was the right direction. After a few minutes, I came across another tree with those strange symbols carved into it. Except this time, there was something else. A crude drawing of a figure, stick-like but with elongated arms. "Well, that's not creepy at all," I joked to myself, trying to shake off the unease. Maybe some teenagers messing around. I took a picture with my phone, thinking it might make for an interesting conversation later. As I moved forward, the rustling sounds grew more frequent. I felt as if I was being watched. Every so often I'd catch a glimpse of movement in my peripheral vision, but whenever I turned, there was nothing. "All right, time to head back," I decided, picking up the pace. I retraced my steps, or at least I thought I did. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center was a makeshift campsite, an old tent, torn and weathered with belongings strewn about. Approaching cautiously, I noticed clothes, a backpack, and even a pair of hiking boots, dust-covered and neglected. I rifled through the backpack, finding a wallet. Inside was an ID, Mark Henderson, Asheville, dated 3 years prior. "What happened to you, Mark?" I whispered. No signs of a struggle, but the place looked abandoned in a hurry. A sudden snap of a twig jolted me upright. I turned to see a man standing at the edge of the clearing. He was tall and gaunt, with unkempt hair and a beard that looked like it hadn't been trimmed in years. His clothes were tattered, and he held a hunting knife, stained with something dark. "Didn't mean to trespass," I stammered, raising my hand slightly. "Just got lost on the trail." He stared at me, unblinking. "Not many people come this way," he finally said, his voice raspy. "Yeah, well, first time for everything." I attempted a weak smile. "I'll just be on my way." He stepped closer. "Find anything interesting?" His eyes darted to the backpack in my hands. "Just trying to find my way back. Thought there might be a map." He tilted his head, a smirk forming on his lips. "Maps won't help you here." The tension was palpable. My heart pounded as I calculated my options. "All right then, I'll just head back the way I came." He chuckled softly. "You city folks are always in such a rush." Without warning, he lunged at me, the knife aimed straight for my chest. Instinct took over. I dodged, feeling the blade graze my arm. Pain seared through me, but adrenaline kept me moving. I swung my backpack at him, hitting his face and causing him to stumble. I bolted into the woods, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I could hear his footsteps, heavy and relentless. "You can't run forever," he shouted. Spotting a fallen tree ahead, I ducked behind it, trying to catch my breath. Blood trickled down my arm. The cut was deeper than I'd realized. I tore a piece of my shirt to wrap the wound. The forest was silent again, but I knew he was close. Minutes passed. Then, a whisper. "Why make this difficult?" I needed a plan. Remembering my phone, I pulled it out. No signal. Of course. But the flashlight function still worked. An idea formed. Picking up a rock, I tossed it into the bushes opposite me. The rustling drew his attention. "There you are," he yelled, moving toward the noise. Using the distraction, I took off in the other direction. The terrain was rough, and my legs ached, but fear pushed me forward. In the distance, I saw a structure, an old ranger station. Salvation. Reaching the building, I found the door locked. Desperate, I smashed a window with my elbow, pain shooting through me, but urgency overriding it. I climbed inside, landing amidst broken glass. The interior was dusty, filled with old equipment and a radio. I ran to the radio, frantically turning knobs. Static. Then, a faint voice. "Park service is over." "Hello, this is Cassius Gibson. I'm at..." I glanced around for any identifying markers. "An old ranger station near the East Trails. I'm being attacked. Please send help." Before I could get a response, the door crashed open. The man stood there, a wild look in his eyes. "Thought you could hide?" I grabbed a metal rod leaning against the wall. "Stay back," he laughed. "Or what? You'll poke me?" He charged. I swung the rod, connecting with his forearm. He dropped the knife, cursing. Seizing the moment, I tackled him, both of us crashing to the floor. We grappled, his hands clawing at my face. I headbutted him, dazing him briefly. Scrambling to my feet, I grabbed the knife. "Don't make me use this," he sneered. "You don't have it in you." Sirens wailed in the distance, a sound I'd heard countless times but never been so grateful for. His expression shifted to one of panic. "Looks like time's up," I said. He lunged once more, but this time I was ready. I sidestepped and, using his momentum, pushed him into a cabinet. He hit his head and collapsed. Moments later, park rangers burst through the door, guns drawn. "Hands where we can see them." I dropped the knife, raising my hands. "He's the one you want," I said, nodding toward the unconscious man. They secured him, checking his vitals. One of the rangers approached me. "You all right?" "Been better," I admitted, holding my injured arm. As they escorted us out, I noticed other officers exploring the area. Over the next few hours, details emerged. The man was Jacob Miller, a recluse who'd been living off the grid. He was suspected in multiple disappearances over the past few years, hikers who had ventured too far off the beaten path. Back at the campground, paramedics patched me up. Linda and Frank approached, concern etched on their faces. "We heard what happened. Are you okay?" "Yeah, thanks to the Rangers." Frank shook his head. "We always stick to the main trails. You never know what's out there." "Lesson learned," I replied. A week later, authorities discovered more campsites like the one I had stumbled upon: personal belongings, IDs, even shallow graves. Jacob Miller had been a predator hiding in plain sight, his crimes unnoticed in the vastness of the mountains. As for me, I returned to Nashville with a new appreciation for the hustle and bustle of city life. Nature's peace was alluring, but it harbored secrets I wasn't keen on uncovering again.